Advisor, what's the advisory council do? What are they there for?
I think they provide advice and counsel to the director of the exchange. I think that's their general role. It's advisory. They don't have the authority to make decisions necessarily, or at least that's my understanding.
Mr. Gray, would
yes.
it be time now for us to ask for anyone speaking in opposition to the bill?
Well, I have 3 quick points, and I will be done.
Quick?
The shop exchange should be direct contracting. Everyone agrees on that. I'd like to see the language in the bill. The essential health benefit, you all need to understand, we don't have a policy in Virginia about who picks the essential health benefit. Is it the legislature? Is it the SEC? Is it the Secretary of Health? The Secretary of Health chose the first one, which was several years ago, via a letter. This is relevant because you all are passing mandates that you think are going to be included, and they're not. The essential health benefit is a static document, a plan that was picked. That's all that's included in the exchange. So, and as you know, you've sent a lot of things to study. People are going to be expecting a decision about whether those go on the exchange or not. That's a big deal. The last is the health insurance assessment. We don't think assessing people outside of the exchange is appropriate. This language says you can assess small group plans outside the exchange and individual plans outside the exchange. That should not occur. Unless you've cleaned it up in the last 5 minutes, but I don't think you have. So that needs to be changed. I mean, nobody wants to create an adverse impact for people who are outside of the exchange. And obviously, you've already heard our comments regard to what we think the appropriate amount would be, namely the federal 3%.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Any opposed to the bill? Delegate Sickles.
Mr. Chairman, I think almost everything Mr. Gray said, I think can be addressed and are reasonable. Some things are reasonable to understand. The shop provisions aren't really used very much. It's not my intention to tax people that aren't participating in the exchange for these services. That goes with it. I don't know why that's in the bill. So we can fix that, and hopefully if you like the concept of this bill, it needs to be reported out to appropriations anyway. We will fix that up there. And the health exchange, it's an interesting point. You know, the administration picked, when we had a choice under Obamacare to pick what essential health benefits plan we did the small group plan of Anthems. That's our standard right now. This bill doesn't address what's done in the future and who decides that. The executive branch decided it last time. I think it's something to look at on what we could have another package other than that the small group plan it's our essential health benefits plan now. So that I think that issue is not totally related. It's applicable, but it's not totally related to this legislation.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sullivan.
I have 2 fast motions.
Okay.
First, I move a line amendment on line 631 after the word 3, add the words "and a half."
There's a motion for a line amendment. All right, and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Line amendment is adopted. Delegate Sullivan.
Move we report and refer to appropriations.
There's a motion to refer and report.
Second.
All right, close the roll. Delegate Sickles, you report with referral 4-3. Thank you, sir.
Thank
that
you.
concludes our docket.
Thank you for helping us improve the bill as we go along. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Everyone's looking at the same clock I am. I got to tell you, y'all look tired already. We're going to have a full and fair hearing on all these bills, but we are going to be moving as quickly as I can politely do it. My inclination is not to put people on a clock, at least not yet. So I'll let you know if we do have to do that. You'll be glad to hear that the docket has skinnied up a little bit. So let me go through those issues. HB 110, Delegate Ware has asked that bill go by for the day. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That bill is by for the day. HB 75, Delegate Corey. That bill is going to go, I've been asked by the patron to have that bill go by till Thursday in the full committee. It's HB 75. Do I have a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That bill will go to the full committee docket on Thursday. HB 889, Delegate Mullen. Same motion. That bill will go by for the day to be heard Thursday in full. Do I have a motion? Second?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded that bill go by to the full committee on Thursday. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That objection so ordered. Delegate Weber, at his request, he has asked that HB 1360 be stricken from the docket. That's a recorded vote. The clerk will please open the rolls. All members will please record their vote on the electronic voting system. Clerk will please close the roll. The bill is stricken from the docket on a 9-0 vote. And finally, I'm sorry, two more. HB 1664. Okay, so 1664 and 1607? Yes. Those are now off the docket, right? Okay. And finally, Delegate Byron's HB 1697. She has asked that be carried over to next year. That's a recorded. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's a voice vote. It's properly moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? HB 1697 will be carried over until next year. Delegate Reed, HB 714.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. What I'm presenting to you today is HB 714, which is the Virginia Energy Plan. What I'd like to start with is that I believe that council has a substitute for this, and if he would be kind enough to disseminate that.
While it's being disseminated, is there a motion?
Move to accept the substitute. Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Substitutes before us.
Just to briefly address the changes between the original bill and the substitute, it is primarily making some language changes, adding some things in. The heart and soul of the legislation remains the same. This is really intended to codify Executive Order 43, which outlined the governor's energy plan, which he had promulgated earlier. There is a Senate companion to this, which is Senate Bill 94, that Senator Favola has already had pass out of the Senate. There are a couple differences between the piece of House legislation that you have in front of you and the piece of Senate legislation that has already passed out, but these are good differences, and I'll get to that. So Senator Favola's bill starts at Section 67102 and includes parts of 67201, while this particular House version is more comprehensive as far as its addressing of the Virginia Energy Plan. So in this particular piece of legislation, We have started at 67-100 to kind of outline some of the legislative findings, and also included information in 67-101 to actually talk about energy objectives. And then we have made an attempt, because this particular document is about setting a framework as far as establishing findings, setting objectives, outlining what the Commonwealth energy policy is going to be, and then it actually goes through and requires the development of a Virginia energy plan in conjunction with the parameters that are outlined in here. So this is a broad policy document that is intended to be supportive and guiding to much of the implementing legislation that you will probably be looking at or have already looked at in this particular subcommittee. So in this particular instance, the House version of this is a little bit more comprehensive, and I will say that Senator Favola has indicated that they are looking forward to getting our results so that we can work together to come up with a really outstanding program. The key components of this, just to highlight some of the big points of this, is this outlines that we will be working towards a 30% renewable goal by 2030 with 100% net zero by 2045. This has been worked out and through discussions with multiple stakeholders, including both utilities as well as other groups. And so I believe that we have agreement on this. And so the one thing that is a little bit different, a little bit unique in this, is that there is a requirement in here for DEQ to actually develop a greenhouse gas inventory by different sectors. The intent here is for us to actually get a baseline of what are the different sectors within the Virginia economy where we are producing greenhouse gases, so then we can then make intelligent decisions about where we need to be actually making changes and investments to move us collectively towards a more zero-carbon, clean energy future.
Thank you, Delegate Reed. Any questions for Delegate Reed from the members of the panel? Is there anyone in
Delegate
the
Lopez?
Delegate Lopez.
Hey, Delegate, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Reed, I don't mean any harm to the bill, but why did, with regard to line 56 and line 72 in the bill, you've got 30% of Virginia's electricity from renewable energy sources by 2030. Why? So wouldn't you want to be a little bit more aggressive with that number?
This is a number that we were able to work out with the various stakeholders, and I think this, and again, in those discussions, everyone has said that they're willing to work towards these goals as long as they know what those goals are, and I think that this is in line with what the governor had outlined in Executive Order 43. And again, 2030 is now only 10 years away. So I think that that is fairly aggressive, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for the patron? Delegate O'Quinn.
Mr. Chairman, question for the patron. Do you know the goals that you have in here, are they consistent with the governor's executive order?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Quinn, I believe that they are consistent. And in some instances, they may actually be a little bit more aggressive because as we've had additional discussions, some of the stakeholders have said that they could actually meet more aggressive standards. I think the governor's original plan was for 2050 for getting to net zero, and I think we're now looking at this as being 2045.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Ayala.
Delegate Reed, could you tell us how this will, this bill, one, who supports it or who has supported, and we may hear from those stakeholders today or this evening, and then the objectives that it will help advance this particular pieces of legislation, like will it touch on health, welfare, safety, precautions, or, how does this piece of legislation just touch some of those high points? You don't have to go in depth.
So, Mr. Chairman and Delegate Ayala, I will speak to the fact that there have been a lot of stakeholder involvement. I will not speak for them, but it has included utilities as well as advocates for clean energy and for reaching kind of a zero carbon goal. So I'll let them speak if they feel comfortable about it when they come up, but it has been something that has been discussed widely amongst those. As far as the other question that you had about the broad scope of this, I think again that you can look at this and you can see that this is a set of findings that says why we need to be doing this, and one of the key one is energy is essential to health, safety, welfare of the people of the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth's economy. I mean, these are one of the early findings in this. And again, this is intended to basically codify what the governor has done, but also make it a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more definitive, because again, we've had more stakeholder involvement, and the idea is that we'll set this broad policy guidelines, and then we will all then be working together towards actual implementing legislation, and the organizations who have been actively involved with supporting this will then know what the goals are and what they need to be doing to achieve those goals.
Anyone in the audience here to speak in favor of HB 714? And as the line gets longer and longer, I will ask you to be very brief.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey with the Virginia Sierra Club. We thank the delegate for bringing this bill. We support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Clayton Medford, Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, thank Delegate Reed for bringing forward the bill. Biggest concern that my membership has in the move toward a zero carbon future is the affordability and reliability of power. We think that these very ambitious and aggressive goals can be met through the stakeholder process, and really would appreciate your support for the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Will Cleveland. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. As somebody who litigates utility cases at the Commission on an almost weekly basis, I can't tell you how important it is that it be clear that the policy of the Commonwealth direct that utility planning towards a clean, carbon-free future. Thank you.
Walton Shepard with NRDC. I agree that the energy plan process in Virginia does need updating to reflect new realities, so appreciate this and support.
Nathan Souls, Zero Carbon Virginia. We support this energy plan bill because it would help bring the energy plan in line with getting Virginia towards the IPCC goal of getting us to zero carbon by 2050. Thank you.
Scott Emery with Zero Carbon Virginia as well. I want to say here to support the bill, just comment, one, it looks on the surface to be an energy bill, a climate change bill. It is those things. That's what motivates us. But I also want you to consider it's an economic development bill. This is where the world's going. The question is, will Virginia join that or sit on the sidelines? We can be counted among the winners. If we put this in place and we plan properly, the transition to zero carbon can be a real win for the Commonwealth. And I ask you to support the bill. Thank you.
I'm Rick Clayton with Zero Carbon Virginia. As an economist, I look at the plan, to have a clear plan that's embraced by Virginia will allow businesses to invest in the clean energy future that will create tens of thousands of jobs in Virginia. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Danielle Sims with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. We also encourage you to support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Wiles with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and we encourage you to support the bill.
Scott McGarry, Washington Gas. The gas utility is fine. The delegates' bill very forward-looking, and we're pleased to support it.
Thank you, Mr. McGeary. Anyone in the audience here to speak against HB 714? Delegate Reed, you have the last word. Delegate Lopez. Been a motion to report properly seconded. This is a recorded vote. Clerk, please open the roll. Members will record their votes on the electronic voting system. Please close the roll. HB 714 reports with a substitute 6-4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Delegate Reed. Delegate Subramanian, HB 528.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a substitute.
While council's passing it out, do I have a motion?
Yes.
It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Substitutes properly before us. House Bill 528 with a substitute. Delegate Subramanian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a bill to protect ratepayers. This basically restores the SEC's ability to determine the amortization period for recovery of any appropriate costs due to the early retirement of coal or gas-fired electrical generation facilities. And so it creates a three-step process for the SEC that is spelled out in the bill. The substitute is different from the original bill in that the utilities are still in charge of determining when to retire the coal or gas plant, but this still restores the SEC's ability to determine the amortization period. And I'll hand it over to Will Cleveland as well.
Well, let's wait first. Are there any questions from the panel for the patron?
Sure.
Delegate Keane.
Just want to understand this. I'm looking at the substitutes for the first time. So now it's a Section 1 bill, and we are lines 13 on down. As part of this analysis, the state corporation shall, and you have 3 factors listed there. Are those the only 3 factors that you envision, or do you want the SEC to look at other provisions that may be an existing law that they already have jurisdictions over? In other words, are these exclusive and replacing those jurisdictional authority, or are we creating this as in addition to the existing authority?
This expands existing authority.
Any other questions from the members of the panel? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak in favor of HB 528?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, Will Cleveland with the Southern Environmental Law Center. I do support this bill. When a coal plant or any other plant retires, there's no question that the utility should and will recover the undepreciated cost of that asset. We're not trying to say that the utility shouldn't get paid. The question is, what is the time period over which the customers are going to pay it off? We believe the commission should set that time period and not the utility. That's all this bill does. Thank you.
Nathan Souls, Zero Carbon Virginia. We support this bill for the reasons aforementioned.
Carmen Bingham, Virginia Poverty Law Center. We support the bill. Thank you.
Danielle Sims, Virginia LCV. We support the bill because it's taking us away from fossil fuels.
Harrison Wallace, Chesapeake Climate Action Network Action Fund, and we support the bill in making sure that we're responsibly taking action on climate and moving to a clean energy future.
Bob Shippey, Sierra Club, Virginia. We appreciate your consideration of this bill and move that you would report it out. Thank you.
Peter Anderson, Appalachian Voices. For the reasons previously stated, we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Meade Browder with the Attorney General's Division of Consumer Counsel. We support the bill, see it as a good rate-making bill, allows the Commission to exercise its rate-making discretion as opposed to simply accepting the accounting treatment that the utility itself would put upon the Commission. Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience here to testify against the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Murray on behalf of Dominion. I'll make just 2 quick observations because I recognize the hour is late. This is also a provision that is sort of like one of the a provision in Mr. Jones's bill you'll see later. First, I would encourage you to ask yourself if Section 1 bills that start notwithstanding any provision of the Code of Virginia is the optimal way to be making energy policy in a session where you have very broad sweeping measures which overlap with a number of freestanding bills before the committee, and I'll suggest in that regard it's a dangerous precedent. More specifically, this bill does conflict with provisions from the 2018 Grid Transformation Act you passed. I understand that that's the intent here. I will say that it is certainly a policy choice for you all to make. You may wish to consider how this affects broader policy that you're embracing. And it would seem a somewhat contrary policy to, on the one hand, want to decarbonize, and on the other hand, complicate retirement of fossil fuel generation stations. For those reasons, we respectfully oppose the bill, and if it's your pleasure to report it, we'll continue talking with you about it through the process.
Anyone else wish to speak against HB 528? Delegate, you get the last word. Delegate Lopez, or excuse me, Delegate O'Quinn.
Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if we call someone from the State Corporation Commission up?
Anyone from the SCC volunteer? Here we go. Sort of volunteer.
We call it voluntold. Yes, I'm Kim Pate with the State Corporation Commission.
Mr. Chairman, I think it might be a good idea at this juncture to tell us maybe how you already do this and then how this bill would change it.
Okay. Are you talking about in just respect to electric plant or just plant in general, because they're two different things if we talk about natural gas and water and sewer. But I'll first start with electric. to answer
Electric,
your
yes,
question.
and the retirement thereof.
Certainly. The code section right now that was referred to earlier, section A8, it's commonly referred to, has language that says that if an asset is impaired, then the company will, if they book it to earnings in a certain year, let's just give an example. If they were to impair an asset in this year, 2020, and they booked it against earnings, that when we did the triennial review, that's how the commission would have to accept it for rate-making purposes. It would reduce the earnings in 2020. The commission could not spread those costs, those remaining stranded costs, over an extended period of time. It would all have to go into that triennial review's earnings. So that's what the code currently says. Now, what this language would do, if I'm still answering your question, it would take it and say that, okay, the asset gets retired in 2020. Now the commission has the ability to look and say, should that cost be all impacted in that triennial review in that current year in 2020 in our example, or should the cost be spread over a period of time due to a variety of reasons? And usually that would happen when we would do the triennial review, and there would be evidence put on the record where different parties would say, recognize it now, spread it over a different period of time, maybe 2 different periods of time, and the commission would make a determination. What this language really does is what the commission, or how the commission addresses any kind of impairments for other types of utilities. The commission kind of does that already for natural gas or water. This is what we look at.
Any further questions from members of the panel? Committee operates on motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Lopez.
Move to report.
Been a motion to report and properly seconded. It's a recorded vote. The clerk will please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic voting system. Oh, with a substitute, correct. Please close the roll. HB 528 reports with a substitute 6-4. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Hurst. HB 1303.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee.
Nuclear energy. We haven't heard anything about that in a while.
I am learning more and more with each passing day. I actually grew up in southeast Pennsylvania, and our power came from a nuclear power plant. I think a lot of people in Virginia would sometimes be surprised to know how much nuclear power we already have generated in Virginia. So in 2019, Virginia took a major step forward, being a leader nationally in economic development tied to energy sector and nuclear by creating a career cluster focused on energy. I remember voting for that. House Bill 1303 represents the next step for the Commonwealth by directing the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy to develop a strategic plan for nuclear energy, including advanced manufacturing, workforce development, groundbreaking research, and energy production. Now, you need to understand, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, that currently there is bipartisan legislation before Congress known as NELA, the Nuclear Energy Leadership Act, which has bipartisan support from our state's delegation. That would provide significant funding for research and economic development projects that will be potentially a part of this legislation. So recently passed federal funding likewise included more than $230 million for research and development of advanced nuclear reactors. And it's this legislation's intent to try and prime Virginia for being able to receive some of that funding, in addition to try and make sure that we are able to achieve goals that are set by Governor Northam in his Executive Order 43 to reduce our carbon footprint by 2030 and 2050 goals. So this is legislation that directs various departments, but seeks to make sure that Virginia is able to have nuclear energy be a viable part of its energy mix and for new research and economic development opportunities. And so that, in sum, Mr. Chairman, is the bill.
Delegate Marshall.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about nuclear energy. As far as the uranium, are we going to, is part of the idea just to make the nuclear plants here? Are we going to also want to mine and mill uranium also?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Marshall, you ask a very pertinent question, I'm sure, for your region. I would say that this is really more about research and development. So in Central Virginia, a little farther north from the area that you represent, firms like Babcock and Wilcox are doing a tremendous amount in research, and that is what a lot of this funding is for. We have the ability now to develop new advanced nuclear reactors that are emitting less waste than the reactors of the past. I don't think this bill touches on where we would actually be supplying any of that uranium that might be used for the fusion.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the patron from the members of the panel? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak in favor of HB 1303? Same ground rules. If you'll be brief, I'd appreciate it. We won't put anyone on a clock yet.
Chairman, members of the committee, Scott Emery with Zero Carbon Virginia. We have to be clear when it comes to climate change. The problem is carbon. And there is good research at places like MIT. When you look at the UN's map pathways to zero carbon future, they all include nuclear. And if we're going to do that in a reasonable way, quickly and cost effectively, nuclear needs to be a part of it. So we support this bill. Thank you.
Good evening. Dimitri Killinger. I'm a PhD student at VCU studying nuclear engineering, focusing on the nuclear fuel cycle. I'm also a student member of the American Nuclear Society at VCU. Delegate Hurst touched on research applications and research technologies that this bill touches on. I just want to kind of, a point is there are a lot of graduate students in Virginia. Virginia makes a lot of good graduate students. We have a lot of good research, but there aren't that many opportunities in research in Virginia for those graduate students, and oftentimes they have to go to other states like California, Idaho, Tennessee, New Mexico, where they do have research labs. This bill would actually help in establishing a research center, a collaboration center in Virginia where that Virginia talent can actually stay and benefit Virginia instead of benefiting these other states. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman, Clayton Medford, Northern Virginia Chamber, asks that you support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Randy Pearson with Two Capitals Consulting, speaking on behalf of a few folks who could not be here this evening. Virginia Commonwealth University and Old Dominion University are in support of the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Emily Hasty on behalf of the Hampton Roads Chamber, and we support this bill.
Tyler Minnick from the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. We want to thank the patron for recognizing the importance of nuclear, not only for our energy mix, but also for the research and economic development opportunities.
Hi, I'm April Wade. I'm the Executive Director for the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium. I also want to thank our patron, and we support this bill.
Thank you. Anyone in the audience here to speak against 1303?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jolene Moffness. I'm with Food and Water Action Virginia, and we oppose this bill because nuclear energy is dangerous, and it would also lead to a carve-out of investing in true renewables like solar, geothermal, and tidal. Thank you.
My name is Kenneth Nygren. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, and I second her remarks.
Delegate Hurst, you get the last word.
I hope it would be the pleasure of the subcommittee to report the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion to report. Is there a second?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic voting apparatus. Please close the roll. HB 1303 reports 8-1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Terry, you ready to go, Terry? Sure, let's go. Delegate Kilgore. Delegate, you have two bills. Start with whichever one you want.
Efficiency 1576.
1576.
And I don't think I have a substitute. I don't.
Extra points.
Good. What this legislation does is raise the automatic opt-out language for industrial energy efficiency programs. Currently, the law is commercial customers whose demand is at least 500 kilowatts are automatically excluded from utility-run energy efficiency programs due to the changes that when we adopted the Senate Bill 966 So, and those customers have participated in the past, but now are ineligible because they no longer have that option. Arbitrary size is one of the lowest in the country and prevents many office parks, retail stores, and other businesses from participating. What this legislation would do would allow more industrial customers to pay for and receive savings and benefits from utility-run energy efficiency programs. So I think raising the limit is one of the most impactful ways that we can work to achieve greater energy efficiency. And the one thing about energy efficiency, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if we're more efficient, we're not having to build power plants and we're not having to worry about that. So that's why this is a good bill. This legislation simply restores it the way it used to be before Senate Bill 966. So I hope that that's my presentation.
Thank you, Delegate Kilgore. I have to tell you, I'm having a little bit of a flashback because when I first got here, you were in this seat and I was at that podium talking about energy efficiency, and you sort of...
I was wrong.
You gave me a hard time. And we have that on tape. Anybody here to speak in favor of this terrific bill, HB 1576?
Good evening. My name is Chelsea Harnish. I'm with the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council, and we support the bill. We think that this will open up the market and provide energy efficiency opportunities to a larger number of customers. It'll also, with the measured and verified savings piece of the bill, it'll also ensure that larger customers are actually capturing the savings that they're saying they are capturing by wanting to opt out, and those savings can actually be counted towards future energy saving goals. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. I just want to thank Delegate Kilgore. Energy efficiency is the best way to help people who are struggling with their energy bills, and so I just want to thank him for this bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Christopher West, here representing Conservatives for Clean Energy. We appreciate Delegate Kilgore for bringing this legislation. We all know that energy efficiency is the cleanest form of energy. It's also the lowest cost resource, and so we hope that you will support this legislation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Lena Lewis with the Nature Conservancy, and we support this bill.
Walton Shepard with NRDC. We support this bill for economic competitiveness. This will particularly help industrial customers in our state who pay higher industrial rates than 4 out of our 5 neighbors, and this will directly help alleviate that impact. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Carmen Bingham with the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and we support this bill, but I'm also very happy that the chairman and Mr. Kilgore have come together on this and for the entire Commonwealth, so I appreciate that. My dreams have come true, sorry.
Is there anyone who wants to testify against this fine bill? Oh.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Vassy, CEO of the Virginia Manufacturers Association. We appreciate the delegate moving this at least to an option to opt out. But I want to remind the committee, Senate Bill 966 2 years ago was the most complicated energy policy we've ever passed. And all of us that were part of that negotiation made an agreement on that bill in total. And I realize agreements can be changed, but for industrials that invest millions in long-term investments, that meant something to us. Integrity is something that is important to us. This provision was part of that agreement. Senate Bill 966 incorporated an absolute exemption. To give you an idea, we produce almost 25% more gross state product with almost the same trillion BTU thermal output as we did a decade ago. The efficiency of our industry is because of our investment in equipment, the change in the way we produce, and the higher value products that we make. It's important to us. We don't need the government to tell us to be efficient. I can promise you the market will do that every day when we're competing against global partners. Every nickel counts. So these folks do take it seriously, but we would ask that we restore the 966 provision as this bill moves through the process. Thank you.
Delegate, well, hold on. Delegate Keem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to make a brief comment to that point, and I do understand and recognize that we are going back to Senate Bill 966. There are many provisions of law that I wish I can go back to pre-SB 966. And so to my friend Brett, I would say that that's how legislative process should work. We try things. If we don't like it, we go back to the way things are. And there are times when we want to take a risk and move forward. And this reminds me of an old saying that even a broken clock is right at least twice a day. So I think I'd be happy to work with Delegate Kilgore on this. Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
What's your motion?
I have a motion to report.
Motion to report. Second. Properly seconded. Please open the rolls. Members, please vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will please close the roll. Delegate Kilgore, your fine bill reports 10-0.
Thank you. All right. My other bill is House Bill 754, and it's a Virginia Brownfield and Coal Mine Renewable Energy Grant Fund and Program. And basically, I have a budget amendment in for, instead of the $35 million when we put the bill in, it's only I think we changed. No, it's 30. It says no more than 35, so that'd be fine. I just put a budget amendment in for 10 million. So, so what this bill does is it allows renewable energy to come to areas where normally, because of cost, because of other reasons, it would not go. Like Southwest Virginia. Maybe Southside Virginia, brownfields, where brownfields are located. So what would happen is, we could use, we're going to be able to use this money to buy down the cost of getting those sites ready. Now, a lot of the old coal mine sites, the abandoned mine land, those are ready to go because a lot of those are already flat, and a lot of those have the power already to them that they used in the coal mining operation. So this is a good opportunity for us to continue in Southwest Virginia and Virginia to be the energy capital of the East Coast. To if the solar, if all these solar companies are going to start coming, then we want them here, and this is an opportunity for us to put those in areas. And why am I saying we're going to put them in brownfields or abandoned coal mines? Is because of the fact that we want to keep our farmland. Because right now, a lot of these solar, if you've got a big solar farm, they're going in and eating up good, usable farmland. Well, if you got brownfields or abandoned mine sites, they're not as good farmland. So that's a benefit to our farmers and to those who rent farms to make a living. So we think that that's a win-win. So it's going to create a grant fund. Awards are going to be granted on a competitive basis. And while I got a budget amendment in, even if I'm not as successful on the budget amendment as I'd like to be, there are still funds out there. I've had conversations with already had a phone call with a conference call with the EPA. They're very interested in this program and are going to come to Southwest Virginia after session. And also, we already have the fund, the Abandoned Mine Land Fund, which is already established, and there's already money in that funds which come toward Southwest Virginia. But our goal is to make this a statewide and look at opportunities for brownfields, look at brownfields that need cleaning up, that we can go in and clean it up and put solar, put these renewable energies in there. So I think it's a good opportunity to be for this whole program to go statewide. So statewide. So that's the bill, and if there are any questions, I would answer them, or if not.
Delegate Ayala.
Delegate Delegate Kilgore, sorry about that.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Sorry, that was a slip.
I'm not running
Sorry.
statewide.
One track mind. I have a question. You said something earlier about tenant farmers, and in conjunction with business. How will it help these tenant farmers? And you may have covered that, so I'm sorry I missed it.
Well, and
then the other part is, and maybe that's coming up later,
well,
who the stakeholders, how they supported you.
Almost 40% of farmland is leased or rented. So folks are renting and leasing farmlands to raise their crops, from individuals who are not using their farmland. So that's going to help keep that farmland in production, and that's a key point, I think. If you a lot of places where there are big farms and everything, they do not want solar, they do not want wind or anything like that because it's going to eat up that farmland. I think this is a golden opportunity for the brownfields or the abandoned coal mines to be used instead of taking up those scarce resources.
So you're recycling.
Yeah.
There you go.
Any other questions for Delegate Kilgore from members of the panel? Anyone in the audience here to testify in favor of HB 754?
I don't have these people on my side. This is great. I gotta get pictures. We gotta get pictures of this.
If you could just remember my comments about the timer. Right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Chelsea Barnes. I work for Appalachian Voices. I live in Wise County, Virginia, down in the coal fields. This is my delegate. We thank him so much for bringing this bill. This bill is the result of several stakeholder meetings that occurred in Southwest Virginia with utilities, nonprofits, local governments, including our nonprofit Appalachian Voices, who've been working together on economic development in the coalfield region, looking for ways to find new economic life for abandoned mine lands in our region and bringing solar industry jobs to Southwest Virginia. We strongly support this bill as it addresses a number of goals, including bringing jobs to economically depressed areas, not only to Southwest Virginia, but areas impacted by industrial activity that has since left brownfields, helping to clean up these sites, and also encouraging renewable development in these areas that are being left behind in the clean energy transition, as you see most development happening in other parts of the state and not in Southwest Virginia. We are really excited that we'll have our first solar installation on an abandoned mineland site in Wise County happening this year, and that was made possible by abandoned mineland funding. So we know that we need this additional funding to help make these sites possible. We are actively talking to solar companies that are excited about this bill, that want to come and build as soon as this program is available. So we strongly support that you, goodness gracious, we ask that you support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lena Lewis with the Nature Conservancy. And in addition to all of the excellent points already raised, we'd just like to add that from a climate perspective, solar energy has many more climate benefits if it is built on previously degraded land rather than on land that used to have forests on it. So we'd rather not cut down the forest to build solar farms. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, want to thank Delegate Kilgore. He really is a statewide leader on recognizing the economic value that solar can bring to the Commonwealth, and I just want to say thank you. And as an attorney who used to do brownfields cleanups when I was in private practice, I can think of no better use for brownfields than solar, so thank you.
Mr. Chairman, committee, my name is Rick Clayton with Zero Carbon Virginia. I spent 40 years of my career with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and in using that data, I compared the occupational profiles of the mining industry with the solar industry. There's a tremendous amount of overlap between these industries, the occupational profiles and the skills. What we have in Southwest Virginia is a lot of people with a lot of skill, a lot of training. We need to just give them the chance to go back to work. I support this bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey, Sierra Club. This is a brilliant bill. We do need to be doing this statewide. The delegate's right. Appreciate him bringing this. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Rachel Smucker with the Virginia Solar Energy Industry Association. We support this bill. We thank the patron for this bill, and we ask that you advance it on to the full committee. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Rob Karate with Sun Tribe Solar. We're based in Charlottesville. We're the company that's actually developing that first ever abandoned mine land project down in Wise County. Appreciate Delegate Kilgore for bringing this bill. Want to point out to the committee that in addition to the solar jobs that brownfield development can bring, it also brings indirect jobs. So that project of ours down in Wise County is going to be powering a data center, which is next to an abandoned mine land. So you have jobs of the 21st century being powered by 21st century energy. Urge you to support the bill. Thank you, Delegate.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Danielle Sims with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. We support the bill as it will bring more renewable energy and more economic development to the Southwest.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Christiana Reeder with the Virginia Poor People's Campaign. We support this and would also like to add it'd be great to use it to expand it for other industrial sites and parking lots and places that are otherwise decorated. A great bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Wallace, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I support it for all these reasons, so I'll save you some time.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, Catherine Bounds, Committee on Energy, and we support the legislation.
Mr. Chairman, Chris West, again, Conservatives for Clean Energy, we support this legislation.
Any further questions for Delegate Kilgore? Delegate, you want the last word?
No, it's fine. I'm just looking for whoever's coming up against it. That's just.
I guess I haven't asked for anyone against this bill.
Mr. Chairman.
You all got to admit these late night meetings are more fun.
Yeah.
All right, you got to admit it.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Delegate Lopez.
Motion move to report the bill.
Well, hold on. Delegate Bagby's also in the queue. Delegate Bagby, I didn't mean to miss you.
I just wanted to do the way that you intended. Move to report.
Second.
Been a motion to report properly seconded. I'm told that this unfortunately will have to, next stop will be Delegate Torian's committee upstairs.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, just a substitute motion, move to report and to refer to appropriations.
That's right.
Second.
Move proper motion and second to report this to and refer to appropriations. Please open the roll. Please vote on the electronic voting machine. Please close the roll. Bill reports and refers 10-0. Delegate Jones.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Jones has 3 bills in front of us, ladies and gentlemen.
I believe it's 4, actually, Mr. Chairman.
Really? Yes, it is 4. Look at that.
Look at that.
All right, settle in, everybody. Delegate, which one do you want to start with? How about
what?
How about Delegate? How about HB 1133?
I think 1133 would be a great place.
It's a nice segue there, right?
Sure.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I would draw your attention to House Bill 1133, the purpose of which is to give the energy market a nudge to develop renewable energy facilities on brownfields, including abandoned parking lots, derelict commercial properties, and former mining sites. This legislation declares that construction or purchase by a public utility prior to January 1st, 2024, of one or more solar or wind generation facilities located on a brownfield, which we're calling a previously developed project site, is in the public interest. Those facilities must have, in the aggregate, a rated capacity that exceeds 200 megawatts. The purchase by the public utility of energy capacity and environmental attributes from such solar facilities owned by persons other than public utility is also deemed to be in the public interest. This is the product of a collaborative public policy mediation involving environmental organizations, consumer advocates, utilities, and the renewable energy industries. I will take my cue from Delegate Lopez to shut up. So I would ask the committee if they have any questions of me or the stakeholders, be happy to answer those.
Any questions for Delegate Jones from members of the committee? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of HB 1133 with something that you didn't say in favor of Delegate Kilgore's bill?
Brothers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alexander McCauley for Powered by Facts. We think this bill works very well with Delegate Kilgore's bill, and we thank Delegate Jones for bringing it.
Anyone in the audience wishing to speak against HB 1133? Delegate Jones, you have the last word on this bill. Delegate Bagby, I see, has a question.
I hope the committee moves favorably upon this legislation.
Second. Been a motion to report, properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic system. Please close the roll. Delegate Jones, HB 1133 reports 10-0.
I think we're off to a good start.
We are. How about HB 1647, Delegate Jones?
Sure. House Bill 1647 authorizes third-party power purchase agreements for all customer classes throughout the Commonwealth, including Southwest Virginia. It raises the cap for net metered residential installations from 1% to 10% of peak demand and non-residential generation facilities from 1 megawatt to 3 megawatts. It removes the ability of utilities to assess standby charges on residential net energy metering customers. And finally, the bill establishes a shared solar program that allows customers to purchase electric power through a subscription in a shared solar facility and allows the tenant of a multifamily residential building or the owner of a condo unit to buy electric power from renewable energy facilities installed by said owner. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Any questions for Delegate Jones from members of the committee?
Man, I caught you guys at a great time tonight, huh?
Anyone in the audience wanting to speak in favor of HB 1647?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey with Sierra Club of Virginia. We strongly support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Chelsea Barnes with Appalachian Voices. We support the bill, and also on behalf of the Solar Work Group of Southwest Virginia, who has been working to attract solar energy jobs to the coalfield region of the state. This addresses many of the barriers that have been facing our region that are blocking projects on schools, on local governments, on businesses, on nonprofits. So I ask that you support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Will Cleveland, Southern Environmental Law Center, support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Alexandra Wyatt. I'm here with Grid Alternatives Mid-Atlantic, which is a nonprofit developer of solar and provider of solar job training, and we support this bill. We support the use of PPAs as an option for expanding access to solar across a wide range of customer classes.
Christiana Reeder with the Virginia Poor People's Campaign, we support this bill.
Excuse me, anyone in the audience wish to speak against HB 1647?
Mr. Chair, Catherine Bounds, Dominion Energy. With all due respect to the patron, we do not support this legislation. The reason we oppose it, I'll just give two examples. One of those is the increase in the net metering cap and the elimination of the ability to collect charges from customers with solar on their roofs for the goods and services provided by the utility that they utilize. In addition to that, it establishes a program that is unlimited, that will allow any customer who wants to engage in a program which would force the utility to pay 25 years worth of fixed fees if they participate in a community solar type of organization, but again, don't pay for the grid that they're using, therefore shifting costs to the other remaining customers.
Mr. Chairman, Ron Jefferson with Appalachian Power. Just one additional comment from Dominion's remarks is when we created or established the net metering provisions, it was established under the mindset of one customer offsetting some or all of its load. And unfortunately, this bill carries it out beyond that. And for that reason, we can't support it. Thank you.
Any further questions for Delegate Jones from members of the panel? Delegate, last word.
I hope it is the pleasure of the committee to act favorably upon House Bill 1647.
Motion to report properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will please vote on the electronic voting system. Clerk will please close the roll. Measure reports by a vote of 6-4.
Mr. Chairman, might we take up 1634 next?
That's what I was going to suggest. Perfect.
All right. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 1634 requires each investor-owned electric utility and electric co-op to establish a shared solar program that allows customers to purchase electric power through a subscription in a shared solar facility, which is defined in the bill, among other criteria, that generates electricity by means of solar photovoltaic devices with a nameplate capacity that does not exceed 5,000 kilowatts. I think you are probably familiar with this bill, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions from the committee about this one. I see Delegate Kilgore looks a little
Any
perplexed.
questions from members of the committee for Delegate Jones? Hearing none. Anyone in the audience here to testify in favor of HB 1634?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Matt Benedetti representing two clients on this issue, Arcadia Power, which is a customer acquisition firm, and the Coalition for Community Solar Access. We strongly support this bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Rachel Smucker with the Virginia Solar Energy Industry Association. We strongly support this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, my name is Chelsea Barnes with Appalachian Voices. We support the bill.
Anyone here to testify against HB 1634?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Catherine Bond with Dominion Energy. We oppose the legislation. I'll draw your attention to two provisions. One of them on line 55, again, requires the utility pay no less than 25 years worth of payments. Continued on the back page of the bill, line 79, would require the utility to do that for 25% of its peak electric demand. That translates to more than 4,000 megawatts of solar projects, or roughly around 1 million customers who would be getting free energy, therefore shifting all the costs that are actually needed to support the goods and services to provide to them to other customers.
Delegate Kilgore.
Hey, can I ask a question? Oh, Catherine.
Ms. Bond?
So your opposition is centered around the fact that other folks would be bearing the burden of this. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I would tell Delegate Kilgore that is correct.
And what would have to be, how could you fix that?
In a couple of ways. One, by putting some reasonable parameters around a program such as this, including ensuring that customers who are still connected to the grid do pay their fair share for those goods and services and therefore do not shift costs to other customers.
Yes, sir.
Ron Jefferson, Appalachian Power. We can't support the bill. Thank you.
Any further questions for Delegate Jones? Delegate
Mr.
Jones, last word.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I've been advised by my esteemed sidekick here that we might be able to amend this before full if you guys are amenable to try to get this to a workable position, and I would hope it would be the pleasure of the committee to do so. Delegate Kilgore seems interested, and I'd be happy to entertain that.
That would be great if you could do that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my one final request would be if you report this, we'll work on it between now and the next full Labor and Commerce Committee, working with all of our energies to do so.
That'll be Thursday. You have about 40 hours.
More than enough.
Delegate Bagby.
I just don't understand how you would amend it.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Bagby, I believe Delegate Kilgore's question and Ms. Bond's answer give us a little bit of wiggle room to figure out a way to carve some people out and put some language in that's going to be able to satisfy all parties. And Matt, if you want to speak to that, I'm happy to.
Sure. I think one of the ideas would be to have the State Corporation Commission take a look at it and see whatever they came up with to work on this program to make sure that the folks who are participating in this program are not utilizing the grid without paying their fair share, so to speak.
Well, we'll look forward to the next 40 hours. We operate on motion.
Mr. I would move to report this bill.
There's a motion to report properly seconded. Please open the rolls. Please vote on the electronic scoring machine. Please close the rolls. Bill reports 9-1. And Delegate Jones, your last bill, and I think you're going to have a partner here.
I think he's going to descend from on
HB
high.
1132.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 1132.
Let me just interrupt you, Delegate Jones. I'm sorry, just so the members know what's going on.
Sure.
HB 969, Delegate Ware's bill, has already been incorporated into HB 1132, so they are a team this evening.
We are a bipartisan team, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 1132, which incorporates Delegate Ware's bill, is pretty simple. For context, I think the last time we had a clean SEC rate review was 1992. I see Delegate Keem is on the panel tonight, and he'll always appreciate jokes about my age. In 1992, I was 3 years old, and so I'm almost 31, and
You
we
had
have yet
to say
have
that, didn't you?
a clean rate review. And so I would tell you that since then, the SEC has been unable to complete a full audit of Dominion's rates and ensure that those rates reflect the company's costs and profit level. And even after this freeze ends from 2015, the SEC's regulatory authority has been steadily stripped away. And without our intervention, without our good stewardship, without our responsibility, the SEC won't be able to do its job. I believe this is a good governance measure. This is a consumer protection measure. I think we as elected officials owe it to our constituents who are the ratepayers to do right by them. And this is something that I think with a lot of stakeholder input, with a lot of workshopping, has come to a point when we are up against a deadline because we cannot do it any later than the 2020 session. And that's why this effort is so critical. So it's the last chance we have to get it right. And I appreciate Delegate Ware's sort of partnership in this because I would not be able to do it without him, but I'll also sort of cede some of my time to Delegate Ware.
Delegate Ware, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Delegate Jones, who really has, as you can see, taken this up and has taken the point on it. I've been watching this through several name changes of this committee, having served on it since 1998. I was not like my partner in elementary school at that time.
See, as long as you get Keem to laugh.
I was kind of looking for Bagby. Seriously, this would do exactly as Delegate Jones said, provide for us a clean rate review and allow us to find out what are the over earnings, are there money that's due back to the ratepayers, which, as you know, has been my concern for many pieces of legislation that have come through here, and that's what this bill would ensure is possible. It doesn't prescribe what the SEC does. It simply says that they will have their Section 10 review as is provided both in this state and other states that are similarly situated. It also, you will almost certainly hear later that this will undo what we did in 966 2 years ago. I would refer you to the letter that you have from the State Corporation Commission, and the first page of that, answers given to questions 1, 2, and 3, refute that explicitly. So if you would just, they're very simple. Most of them are one-sentence answers, so you can anticipate that, and you'll have the answer to that objection, which may be placed later in this hearing. With that said, Mr. Chairman, if you would permit, we do have a professor here to offer just a few observations about this. And
certainly.
This is Professor Joel Eisen. He's with the University of Richmond, has decades of experience both inside and outside Virginia in this topic, and I would ask him to come forward.
Thank you, Delegate Ware. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, as the Corporation Commission makes clear in its letter, 966 projects can still be fully funded under this bill. Even expensive or risky ones, utilities can come forward and ask to recover their costs from the ratepayers. They can make a rate request that accounts for these projects, no matter how ambitious they may be. This bill does one thing. It aligns our state with other states whose laws look very similar to Chapter 10. Other states see no justification for departing from the traditional tried and true standards of fair utility regulation. We recognize that the process that's set forth in 56-585 is cumbersome and unfair. No state in our region has anything like the banding provision that provides a specific range for utilities profit. No state in our region has a provision that has a refund ceiling fixing when customers may receive refunds. We should have a regulatory system that's based on Chapter 10. Virginia's ratepayers may lose out to the tune of billions of dollars if the fundamental standards of fairness that are applied throughout the nation are not applied here now. A couple of other things you will hear that I'd like to say a word about right now. First, the opponents of this bill have talked about reliability. The reliability of the electric grid that we have now was established by decades of application of these tried and true standards of utility rate regulation. So that, returning us to that background of Chapter 10 simply harmonizes us with what has been done for decades to build the electric grid that we have now. I've studied grid modernization proceedings in every state in the nation. Every state that has worked on grid modernization has applied these standards like those in Chapter 10, to govern its proceedings, to look to the future. major utilities in other states, Duke Energy, Georgia Power, have come to their commissions with multi-billion-dollar requests for rate increases to do ambitious new projects. Their commissions have not seen any reason whatsoever to depart from the standards that are like those of Chapter 10. For this reason, I think it's extremely important that we use those standards in this rate case. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the members of the panel for either of the patrons? Delegate Heretic.
Mr. Chairman, 2 years ago, we did the infrastructure, omnibus bill, where rate reviews were specifically negotiated with a lot of other things. I'm wondering aloud, and my concern is, aren't we sort of upending the infrastructure bill that we just inked 2 years ago and putting this in now?
The short answer is no.
Hard to get shorter
Mr.
than
Chairman.
that. Next question.
Could you be more specific?
I certainly would, but I tell you what, let me get somebody who observes this and, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, Will Cleveland with the Southern Environmental Law Center. This bill is not about the Commission's standard of review when it's coming to specific projects, be that solar, wind, or grid modernization. This bill does not change review of those projects. This bill does not change the question of whether the utility will recover the cost of those projects. What this bill is about is the fact that Dominion is a monopoly. And as a monopoly, they are entitled to recover their costs, and they are entitled to earn a fair profit on those costs. But in the absence of competition, they are not entitled to earn excess profits. The rates we pay now are generating an unfair profit. What this bill does is allow the State Corporation Commission to set the rates so that we pay what they should pay. And I do not believe that this bill in any way, shape, or form undermines the package that was passed 2 years ago in terms of whether a project gets approved or whether grid modernization happens.
And Mr. Chairman and Delegate Heretic, I would point you to, I think, the letter from the SCC, which I think should have been distributed. I think there's a question that directly goes to that, and I think the State Corporation Commission says, no, this will not touch anything that we passed in grid mod, which I will admit I voted for 2 years ago. And frankly, I'm all about alternative sources of energy. I'm all about finding ways for us to get to a better place in Virginia. This is about the rate. This is about the underlying rate that we pay, that you pay, that I pay when we have our electric bills. And I will tell you that I think with some of the other things that this committee has passed out, the rate will change. Your bill is going to change a little bit, but your rate's going to go down. Some of the things that you guys might have passed might bring that up a little bit, but I think all things held equal, this is going to bring it down considerably. I think you've seen that there's been some over-earnings over the course of the last decade or so. I was not here to vote in 2015 and some of these other times, but I'm here to do my part, and that's, I think, what we're supposed to do as delegates, as senators, as stewards of our constituents' pocketbooks.
You were only in middle school in 2015, right?
Any,
Delegate
Jones,
Chairman, I won't even dignify that one.
Delegate Jones, I see some people behind you. They look like they want to testify in favor of the bill. Mr. Browder.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Meade Browder with the Attorney General's Consumer Council Ratepayer Advocate. I do have a couple of points I'll try to make very briefly, but I would like to also try to directly expand upon the question that Delegate Heretic asked. This should not in any way prevent the company from embarking on, undertaking, and recovering cost for the types of projects that were set forth in the Grid Transformation Security Act. Grid transformation, distribution transformation projects, solar projects. What that act did, and I'll try to make this as simple as I possibly can, it was complicated. It set up a unique concept called customer credit reinvestment offsets. And that simply meant that if there are over earnings in the review period, let's say that's $300 million as an example. If the company had made capital investments, they could use up to that $300 million and sort of recoup those costs in one fell swoop. So normally you'd make a large capital cost, you don't pay for it, like in cash, you don't buy your house and just pay cash. You finance it over a period of time. That's normally how investments would go into rate base, be amortized over a period of time. The customer credit reinvestment offset allowed to basically pay it off at once against surplus earnings. With this bill, they could not pay for it at once with the surplus earnings in 2021. They could in future triennial reviews. But in 2021, if they had made such investments, it would just have to go into the rate base and be recovered from customers in rates in a more piecemeal fashion, like paying the mortgage. And then in the 2024 case, we'd be picked back up with the kind of status quo coming from the Grid Transformation Security Act. So it does not prevent, should not frustrate those investments. It might affect how the company recovers cost, but it does not prevent those types of investments. I'll try to make this quick, but a few other points I would like to make. And Attorney General does strongly support the bill. We do think that, as Delegate Jones alluded to, there are many other things going on this session that may, undertakings that may have some cost. Good projects, but they'll have some cost. This bill will allow rates to get reset to the extent there are over earnings, allow rates to get reset at a level of recovering cost and a fair rate of return. And that's what should be the standard, not how rates are compared to some other state, not whether they meet some affordability test, but are the rates recovering costs and a fair rate of return. And there's very strong evidence suggests that currently they're recovering cost, fair rate of return, plus a fair amount of excess. And we see that in the reports that the Commission puts out each year that they're directed to do by the General Assembly, where they take accounting data from the company. The accounting staff at the Commission does not audit it. It takes it what the company reports. And in 2018, as an example, the company earned 13.5% return on equity from its base rates. If you use a benchmark of 9.2%, which is the fair rate of return the Commission has set for the rate adjustment clauses, which have not been frozen, that equates to $277 million for 2018 above cost and a fair rate of return. If we're in a rate case, typically not every accounting adjustment that the company makes is accepted by the Commission. That means that number would most likely go higher if we have the same situations in the 2021 rate case that we've seen historically. $300 million a year in revenues accounts to about a $6 a month bill impact on a residential customer. Obviously a lot more than that for a commercial or industrial customer. The other point I'd like to make is that current base rates, they have not been changed since the early 90s, apart from the change for the federal tax laws brought down because of the tax cut. But there are many costs baked into current base rates that no longer exist for the company. Plants that have been retired, there's still operation and maintenance costs and recovery of those costs that are in the base rate, but the rates haven't been changed to reflect that. Contracts for purchase power with non-utility generators, those contracts have expired, but the costs are still baked into those rates. Whereas new investments, new power plants, new programs have gone into RACs. So new costs have gone into RACs. The old costs are still stuck in base rates. So that's why we believe that the current base rates are at a level that is too high. This would allow those to hopefully come down. The Grid Transformation Security Act put in an arbitrary limit on how much rates could be cut in the 2021 rate case of $50 million. I guess it was just a term that somebody came up with. This would allow the Commission to bring them down as much as they need be, if they need to be. Maybe the facts will show that they don't, but it would sort of take the restrictions off the Commission to get the rate reset.
Thank you, Mr. Browder. I see some familiar faces, so if you could try to limit yourself to who you are and who you represent, and I gather you support the bill.
Carmen Bingham, Virginia Poverty Law Center, for all the reasons Mr. Cleveland and Mr. Browder stated, we are in full support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Little, and I'm a nurse and a mother, and I've seen many, many patients choose not buying medications to pay their utility bills. We have many people with $500 utility bills in our area, $500 a month, and so I would really like you to support this bill. Keep the money in our people's pockets instead of Dominion's pockets.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Peter Anderson with Appalachian Voices. For the reasons previously stated by others, we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Wallace, CCAN Action Fund, we support the bill.
Shippey, Sierra, support.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Christy Smith, Virginia Conservation Network. Our thanks to both patrons for their leadership on the issue. We support the bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Ben Hoyne with the Virginia Interfaith Center and Interfaith Power and Light, representing tens of thousands of people of faith from across the Commonwealth. Less than 2 weeks ago in this very room, you all took a courageous vote on a piece of legislation to make things fair for business and fair for the people of Virginia. Delegate Bagby's predatory lending bill closed loopholes that allowed businesses to take money from the pockets of hardworking Virginians. The profit on that money was practically unregulated, and the profit margins were astronomical. Consumers engaged with these businesses had nowhere else to go. Rather than allow these corporations to exploit Virginians in order to put money in the pockets of their shareholders on Wall Street, you did what was fair and just. Mr. Chair, we ask that you do what is fair and just for all Virginians tonight and support this bill. Thank you.
Christiana Reeder of Virginia Poor People's Campaign, we support this bill.
Hi, Jolie Moffness with Food and Water Action. We support this bill.
Anyone in the audience here to testify against HB 1132?
Mr. Chairman, John Rust on behalf of Dominion Energy. Wanted to talk a little bit about what this bill does so we understand what we're talking about. This bill would basically change the triennial review in 2021 into a review under Chapter 10, something we haven't done for more than 20 years. It would stop the recovery of costs under RACs during that review and not allow us to come back to that until 3 years later in 2024. So the result is that, yes, we don't have an interference with our ability to recover these things ever, but we don't have an ability to recover them on a regular basis. Let's talk about Chapter 10. Other than old codgers like myself and experienced legislators like Delegate Ware, people haven't seen how Chapter 10 works. And Chapter 10 doesn't have any incentives for the utility to come forward and be efficient. It doesn't have incentives for the utility to come forward and do things like generation. That was something that was not something we considered under Chapter 10. The legislature abandoned that concept in 1999 and went to deregulate the utility so we weren't subject to that kind of problem. We didn't have a bureaucratic fee schedule going forward. When we did the deregulation, what we found is we didn't have legitimate competition for generation in Virginia. We lost our ability to actually develop the types of electricity that we needed to guarantee people got access to those things going forward. And we came back in 2007 and we did what was called re-regulation. And what re-regulation did, it said we're going to create incentives for the utility to do the type of generation that we need in order to serve Virginia. We're going to have incentives for the utility to do a more efficient operation so we reduce the cost as we go forward. And we've operated under that for about 12 years. And as we have gone through the changes in generation, as we have gone through what people are looking for, our incentives have changed. We're no longer looking at a huge coal plant in Southwest Virginia. We're looking at solar and wind. We're looking at things that are consistent with the energy policy that Virginia wants. And we put the incentives in place so the utility will begin to do that. In 2018, we adopted the Grid Transformation Act. basically to really begin to do capital improvements to the grid, to make it reliable, to make it work, to take care of the modern things that needed to be done. And we understood that there was going to be a cost involved in that. And we encouraged the utility to incur it. We also said, we want solar, we want wind, and we encouraged the utility to go forward with that in Senate Bill 966. And that's what we've been working for since that time. We're now coming to our first review since that bill was passed. There has been substantial money paid for things like the grid transformation, for things like the solar and wind that's going forward. And suddenly we can't consider it under this bill. Suddenly we're not going to have anything that happens in 2021 to reflect the cost we've incurred just since 2018. Sure, we'll recover it in 2024. The only thing that's false about this bill is the rate cut that happens in 2021 that's reinstated with 6 years of costs that are going to be incurred in 2024. All this does is do an artificial rate reduction and then imposes upon our folks the requirement to repay those costs in 2024. One of the things that we did, one of the opportunities we had in 966 was that let's freeze the rates so we have an opportunity to do very substantial capital investments in a way that's not going to cost our ratepayers. And that's what everybody talked about in 2018. That's what we did in Senate Bill 966. That is what this undoes. What this does is it takes all the promises that we've been working with for the last 12 years and says we're going to do a rate review that has nothing to do with what we've been trying to accomplish. We're not going to look at Delegate Jones 1133, which wants us to go out into brownfields and develop renewables. We're going to say, no, we're not going to give you any incentive to do that in 2021, but we'd like to have you come back and do it in 2024. This is not a straightforward representation to our customers what they're going to need. This is something that undoes the basic structure of our energy policy we've been working on for the last 12 years. It undoes everything that this assembly has tried to do and where you want energy to go, and says we're going to look at something different in 2021, cut the rates, and then jack the rates right back up in 2024 for the cost we've deferred and not looked at in 2021. I'd urge you not to put that type of artificial reduction before our customers and then make them face a huge rate increase 3 years later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Rust. Delegate Keene.
Mr. Rust, if you could return to the podium, if I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Rust, first of all, I haven't been here as long as some of the other members here. I've only been here 11 years. I also haven't been as steeped in this set of regulatory laws as you and many others in this room have. But I do have a pretty good memory of what happened just the last 3 or 4 years, if not last 10 years. And I recall the reason why we had Senate Bill 966 in 2018 was not because our utilities came and asked us for a plan to harden the infrastructure. My conversations with representatives from your company and many others predates that. My conversation started in 2015 when the triggering mechanism, the reason why we started the conversation about 2018 was because we, this General Assembly, against my wishes, against my votes, passed a law that allowed you to skip a rate review in 2015, which would have been due in 2017, but by the time we got around to fixing that rate review, we got to 2018.
Yes, sir.
And by the time we got to fixing 2018's rate review so that you all could be part of the SEC review, we've now kicked the can down 3 more years at your request, if I recall. Dominion specifically asked that we go from a 2-year review to a triennial review. So just for the record, I want to understand whether my recollection of what happened in the last few years is correct. Is it not the case that the reason why we have not had a rate review since 2015 until now is because of 2 bills that you all helped draft and ask for so that we're in this position now? So that's my first question.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Keene, I agree with you that it has been things that the utility has done I would not agree that 966 was not to do the grid transformation. That was something that we recognized was a very important project that we wanted to do. It meant the smart meters. It meant the security improvements to the grid. It meant the things we knew we had to do in order to do adequate service to the Virginia citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that was a cost we were going to have to incur, and the question is, how do we pay it?
Mr. Chair, so a couple more questions, please, because I would agree with you that 2018 legislation ended up being that. But
Yes, sir.
I still remember very vividly with some members of this in this room right now, the conversation that began the 2018 process was about how do we fix the rate freeze that we had in 2015? How do we get back to where we should be? So that's one. So the second question I have, and I want to just make sure I understand this, because whether it's back to Chapter 10 or another form of rate review, is it not the case that Dominion Energy in Virginia has not had a base rate review since 1992? And if that's the case, that we haven't had one, is it not the case that based on the 2018 law that the next review would be in 2021?
The next review would be in 2021.
Okay, so Mr. Chair.
And the problem that we have is we're not reviewing the costs that we've been incurring under the regulatory format that's been in place for a dozen years.
Sure.
What we're looking at are things that haven't been in place since 1999.
So Mr. Chair, just to follow up on this, because I want to make sure that regardless of where you vote on this, and I'm happy to have conversations about the merits of this bill or not, but I just want to make sure we're voting with the right facts in front of us. Is it not the case, regardless of whether the rate review of 2021 would be about the current set of expenses or a different set of expenses, the reality is, because we have not had a base rate since 1992, is it not true, is it not the case, that there are roughly $3.4 billion with a B of overcharges that Dominion has charged your customers that has never been refunded, other than $1.3 billion that was refunded recently? So is it not the case there are at least $2 billion that's still outstanding that has not been returned to customers? Please, please,
Hey, folks,
please,
please.
Let's do this respectfully.
No,
I just want to make sure I get some facts here.
No, so that's, sure.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
Bill
Murray.
Murray with Dominion. On the timing, we had a biennial review in 2015. The model this bill proposes, under Chapter 10, if you were to stay at Chapter 10, there's no regular schedule of reviews, there's no refund. Alabama Power operates under something very similar, went 3 decades without a rate review. That's traditional regulation.
Okay.
Under traditional regulation, which is Chapter 10, the utility brings a review when it wants a rate increase. In theory, you could be called in for a review by the regulators at any time. That seldom happens. The 2007 Re-Regulation Act established a system of biennial reviews that the 2018 bill changed to triennial reviews.
That's right.
We looked at this a few years ago. On average, utility rate cases are every 5 to 7 years. Our last base rate review was in 2015, reviewing years 2013 and 2014. Next one's 2021. Entirely consistent with about the average among utilities. I will emphasize we're one of the only states where refunds is a concept. In most states, the commission can prospectively adjust rates. You can have a settlement that includes refunds, but it's not a routine part of the process.
So, Mr. Chair, just one final question.
last question,
And I
Bill,
just,
you can-
like I said, my goal here is to make sure we understand what the facts are. We can agree or disagree on whether this is the right solution, but I want to at least make sure we're. So the bottom line is this, Mr. Chairman and members. My understanding of the way this area works and the work I've done so far and the confirmation I have in front of me in writing is that there are roughly $2.2 billion that's outstanding that Dominion has overcharged its customers. And right now, regardless of whether it's this vehicle or another vehicle, there is no way the SEC can request or mandate or require that you refund that unless there is a rate review first. Is that not the case? So you need to come back to the SEC before that can happen. You wouldn't do it voluntarily. You're not going to write checks to customers on your own. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, under 2018 legislation, we've announced this publicly. We spent $300 million on the offshore wind pilot using the customer credit offset that would otherwise have gone in a rate adjustment clause. Customer credit offset does net against over earnings, but a rate adjustment clause is a straight-up rate increase. No rates changed because of that. They didn't go up, they didn't go down. A rate adjustment clause, by definition, you go up. Similarly, we've announced the intent to spend an additional couple $100 million on a customer information system, and that's basically an updated billing computer to do things like implement Delegate Bagby's PIP legislation that was purported out of this legislation in smart meters. We're behind other states in deployment of smart meters. This is something that's very critical to a lot of the energy efficiency and renewable energy applications people wanted. The 2018 Act is working, and that's what Mr. Rust has been suggesting to you. We've made those concrete investments.
Delegate Ayala.
Mr. Chair, I think that Delegate Keem asked a lot of my questions because, Mr. Rust, maybe you can help me understand. You mentioned earlier in your testimony about it stops you from recovering cost, or the utilities cannot recover some of their cost, to the spirit of your question, not exactly, just paraphrasing. And what I'm understanding is that what the SEC says, that's not the case per this letter. So I'm just trying to digest or understand, clarify what you meant by that.
Mr. Chairman, ma'am, if I can just respond to it. The Commission is saying that, yes, we can recover our costs, but not in 2021. In 2021, we have removed the capacity to do the charges for the various things that we've been doing. All of those things get put aside, and the only thing we look at is the operation of the company under Chapter 10. The Commission is saying, yes, we can recover it later. We can cover it in 2024, which means that the things they're not looking at in the rate review in 2021 come back in full force in 2024. The concern that I have when we look at what's in the existing statute, there is a rate review in 2021. There is a rate review where there's a determination what is the proper rate of Dominion that also takes into account the things that we're doing from a capital perspective that are a part of that rate review. Things like the grid modernization, things like the replenishment of the various items that are in there that would be eliminated from the consideration in 2021 under this Act.
Delegate Lopez. Quickly.
Looking at my notes here, Mr. Rust, you said that Chapter 10 isn't used, but didn't a Kentucky utility based in Southwest Virginia finish up a rate case just in November under Chapter 10?
The Kentucky utility that is in Virginia is a very limited utility. The Phase 1 and Phase 2 utilities were affected by 966 and by the re-reg that was done in 2007.
But and follow up, Mr. Chairman, isn't every other utility, gas and water facility in Virginia also under Chapter 10?
We're talking about the electric utilities that are the investor-owned utilities. They are not subject to Chapter 10 under the existing statute.
And so, just
last question.
Why is there a $50 million cap on the amount the Commission can lower the base rate by in a given rate case? And shouldn't the rates reflect costs instead of just this arbitrary number?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Lopez, I agree with you, but this was the first review that we were going to do when we were taking into account substantial expenditures that were being made on the capital side. It was a limitation on that review that it goes out of existence when you go forward into 2024. So this is a one-time restriction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to exercise Chairman's prerogative very quickly and call on Ms. Pate. I don't want to ambush you, but just give you the opportunity. Have you heard anything over the course of the last half hour that you need to correct in terms of what, frankly, anyone has said, particularly in the context of the letter you sent us?
I'll try to. There's been a lot of things said. A lot of things were said correctly. That's the good news.
Say again, I'm sorry?
A lot of things were said correctly.
Thank you.
So that's the good news. The one thing I'll start off with is that we haven't had a rate case since 1992. That's not the case. Rates were changed on a cost of service basis in 1992. That's the last time rates were set on a cost of service basis. We had another base rate case in 1996, and just as a little piece of history that way, that occurred because of Commission direction. Dominion had been over-earning in 1993, 1994, and 1995. And so the Commission put Dominion on notice that they needed to come in and substantiate why their rates were high at that point. At the end of the proceeding, we had a settlement between the parties in the case, and the Commission adopted the settlement that included a rate reduction of $150 million, plus some refunds that also went to customers, and also some future costs that were not going to be recovered from customers. So there was a variety of things that went on. Then you can fast forward to 2008. We had another base rate case. It was referred to as the going-in rate case. And at that point in time, there was a full hearing before the commission. Again, there was a settlement between all the parties, and there was about $724 million in benefits that went to customers as a result of that settlement. So rates weren't set at that time. Again, last time rates were actually set on the cost of service was 92, but we've had a variety of other things since then. Plus, then we started with biennial reviews, which we have had refunds since that time. So I don't know if that helps clarify, but there's been more movement than just kind of going back to 92 and just using that as a point of reference.
Thank you.
As far as Mr. Russ said, and I'm confused by his statement, he said that costs would be deferred in the 2021 triennial review under this FEBA bill and would be pushed off for recovery in 2024. And I don't understand that statement. Basically, all the costs that the company spends, whether it's for AMI meters, whether it's for putting lines underground, connecting a customer, all of those costs are paid by customers. It just happens through a variety of rate mechanisms. None of that is absorbed by shareholders. So I just wanted to make that clear also. It can happen through base rates, and there was a lot of talk about AMI meters that Dominion said they were behind. They are behind, but that's because the other utilities, the electric cooperatives and Appalachian Power, have mostly rolled out AMI meters. They have done it and recovered the cost through base rates. So that's one mechanism. Y'all created, as Mr. Browder referred to earlier, the CCROs. That's another method that takes the money that customers would have gotten as a customer refund and allows the company immediate recovery of costs. And there's certain items that can happen with that. Then we also have the rate adjustment clauses. And so if the company currently has a case before the commission for the grid mod, we refer to as a GTSA, and they've asked for a rate adjustment clause. So they've asked to recover different costs, the AMI meters, they've asked for grid hardening, et cetera. Depending on what the commission finds, the company will increase its rates through a rate adjustment clause or rider to recover those costs. So when he made that statement, maybe I just need clarification, but I didn't understand what that meant.
Okay, thank you very much. Very kind of you, Ms. Pate. Appreciate your time. So this bill has slowed us down, hasn't it?
Good legislation can sometimes
No question. No,
take time.
it's worth the time. I see no further questions from the panel. Last word, Delegates Jones or Ware?
This is your chance. There has not been a circumstance before this committee to take get a baseline case. That's what we're offering here. You've heard from very able advocates from Dominion. You know you hear from them every year. You've heard also from the State Corporation Commission. You have a letter. You have the advocate for the ordinary citizen from the Attorney General who came up here. He's asking you, he's saying Dominion can get what it needs, but we need to have a baseline case to find out what the charges actually are. I ask you to pass this bill.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Bagby?
Move
the report. Second. Been a motion to report properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, there is a substitute. That's right. So it's a report with substitute. The incorporation is the substitute. We've got it. Please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic voting system. Please close the roll. The bill reports with a substitute by a vote of 6-4. Delegate Keem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Have a great night.
While Delegate Keem is moving down front, we've heard from Delegate Corey, who also has on the docket HB 1298. She would like to do the same thing we did with her other bill, which is pass it by till Thursday in full committee.
Mr. Chair, members of the
Hold on.
subcommittee.
Can I have a?
Oh.
We don't.
So moved.
Is that a recorded vote? Did we do that? No. Voice vote. We'll just put that. Pass that by until
Thursday.
Thursday's full committee. This is HB 1140.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, first I'd like to offer a substitute, which Mr. Stevens has.
Motion on the substitute?
So moved.
I
Second.
have a motion. Properly seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That objection, the substitute's before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate
Yeah.
Keem.
So House Bill 1140 is my effort working with some of my constituents and addressing an issue that I think all of us are very, very familiar with. The governor recently announced a pilot program that would use some funds from the Volkswagen settlement to electrify our school buses. So he's started the conversation by saying this is an emergency, an urgent matter for us in the Commonwealth to convert one of the most the largest carbon-emitting product that we have in our state, which is transportation, and doing our best to ensure that those kids who are on those school buses have the cleanest buses possible, both for their health as well as for the environment. So he's already started down this track. Our friends at Dominion have also offered as a pilot program the same concept of electrifying some school buses, and they were very generous in supporting this idea of providing grants for some school districts, and my district in Northern Virginia and Fairfax is one of the schools that are trying to seek some funding for this. So I think the conversation about the need to electrify our school buses is certainly moving forward. I think given the number of school buses we have in the Commonwealth and the much great need that we have to address, I think this is one of those areas where there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. I welcome anybody and everybody who wants to work with us on this. So my bill is just a modest effort to try to have our state government step up and do our part in providing some grants. So the way my bill would work, Mr. Chairman, is the concept behind it is that we believe that schools, public education is certainly a core function of our government, and transporting kids to and from school is also part of that, and therefore it should be something that's done by the government as a government program, not something that we privatize and not something that we use as a profit motive for some other company to come in. So to the extent that we can own this as a government program, we would create a new fund within the general fund that would be the Clean School Bus Grant Program. I do have a budget amendment in the appropriations, so if this were to move forward, I would request that this be referred to the Appropriations Committee. But basically, the fund would be a competitive grant program for school divisions that want to electrify their schools to seek the funding. It'll be the delta between the cost of replacing a regular bus with a regular diesel bus versus regular bus with an electric bus. We would pay for that difference through this grant program. It's designed to be a competitive program, but with some priorities. We want to make sure that those areas that have the highest concerns of children with asthma or air pollution would be the earliest ones that would prioritize, and also those schools that have buses that are more run down, that need the urgent repairs, as well as the ones that have the most mileage. And we're thinking, without coming out and saying so, we're looking at obviously rural areas. We want to make sure that our buses in the rural areas are given the priority. So what we want to do with this bill is to create a program that doesn't exist today, but would complement the other existing programs that are just getting off the ground, so that at the end of maybe 10, 15 years from now, we'll have as many school buses electrified as possible. Mr. Chairman, I do have a young constituent who drove down here from Northern Virginia earlier in the day, so if you are willing and able to listen to the public, I'd like to ask my young constituent to start this conversation first. It worked last week, so I figured I'll bring another young kid.
Sure.
Yeah, Bobby, I go. This is up to you.
We'll have the young constituent first.
Good evening.
Always works to bring a young kid. Just say something.
Hi, I'm Katie Monticello with the Sunrise Movement Fairfax County chapter. And I just want to say that my organization and all of the high schoolers that are part of it support the electric school buses.
Thank you, Katie. Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
Bobby Monticello from Mothers Out Front Fairfax, Katie's mom. And we support the bill because we as moms feel that transitioning school buses to electric in our state can't happen fast enough. And we also feel like we want to prioritize areas that have high asthma rates and low air quality, and also the oldest, most polluting buses. We know that school buses are the largest mass transit system in our country. There are 480,000 of them versus 140,000 public transit buses. And in Fairfax alone, we have the second largest fleet in the country at 1625 buses. And in the state, there are 17,000 of them. So our state needs to be a leader on this. There are 1.5 million kids riding on these buses in Virginia, breathing asthma and cancer-causing fumes that are concentrated 6 times inside the bus. They're on these buses for several hours a day. Meanwhile, the IPCC tells us we have 10 years to turn back climate emissions to avoid the worst effects of climate change. And diesel buses have a 15-year lifespan. So locking ourselves into 15 more years of fossil fuel emissions makes no sense. We need all the electric school buses we can get on the ground as soon as possible, because our kids' future can't wait for this change. Thanks.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Anyone else here to speak in favor of HB 1140? Really quickly.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, my name is Joe Rupp. I'm here with Environment Virginia. We have roughly 50,000 active supporters throughout the state. We are very much in favor of HB 1140. Today, the vast majority of the buses that are replaced in Virginia are diesel. They subsequently simultaneously contribute to the climate crisis and health problems for our children. So school districts need as many resources as they can to break the cycle of diesel, and we ask your support for this bill.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Madeline Kelsey, Food and Water Action. We support the bill.
Sierra Club supports the bill.
Rick Clayton, Zero Carbon Virginia. We strongly support this bill.
Thank you. Anybody here to testify against HB 1140? Any further questions? Delegate O'Quinn.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for the patron.
Sure. Delegate O'Quinn.
So, Delegate Keem, in thinking about what you're trying to do here, and we talked about it earlier, I understand exactly what you're getting at. So, to the point that was made earlier about trying to replace the older buses first. So, I know in our part of the state and in other rural areas as well, we have buses that are going well past their useful life cycle simply because they can't afford to replace them. And I think that the difference in cost is about $100,000 to about $300,000. So my question being, I tried to tackle this in a school construction bill that I had a few days ago, and put in a tiered system for awards based on. I use composite index. I mean, it's not like that's some magic formula, but that's what I used. And so I was curious if there was a way that maybe we could figure out being able to tier that so that school systems who have less of an ability to actually replace these on their own might be able to get a bigger portion of that award versus localities that can maybe afford to just replace all of them as they bubble up.
Mr. Chair, I'd answer that, my friend from, where are you from? Delegate O'Quinn from Southwest statewide. I'd say that I am certainly open to the idea. In fact, we were talking about this earlier, and I'm trying to balance a couple of very important policies that are all good and do it in a way that's fair for everyone. One policy is we want to ensure that the kids that have the most at risk in terms of their health, the asthma, the bad air and such, that we try to address that first from a health perspective. And that many times it's going to be in the urban areas because you have more pollution just because we have more traffic and such. So that's one thing. The other side is needs. The school districts like yours and many others that have a financial need that you just can't find the kind of sources. I remember we worked on some bills last year and the years before to try to provide you some funding for advertising on school buses, what have you. So that's another economic needs-based. So I want to try to balance those two so that if there's some way that we can overlap and say that gets actually extra points as the main factor, and then we kind of tier that. I love the idea. I just haven't been able to come up with a system that works for everybody. But on the other hand, the real question is how much funding can we get? So the real challenge for me, Mr. Chairman, is even if we all love the policy, I got to convince our administration that in addition to the pilot program that they started using the funding that came from Volkswagen, in addition to our friends at Dominion who are putting up some funding as well, can we find some other sources of funding that will kind of create synergy with all these school bus programs? That way we can have enough people coming in and asking for this so that this tier system works. So I'd love to work with you on that. Like I said, Mr. Chairman, I'm open to working with anybody to get this done, and this is not going to be a one-year program. So even if we start this program this year, we're going to have to keep working until we get the good results.
Delegate Ayala. The motion to report properly seconded.
I don't want to send it to approve, so I think I should.
Oh, there is, I'm sorry, there is a FIS on this, isn't there? Yes.
Yes, sir. I'd like to create a fund out of thin air, but I don't think I can.
So the motion is to report.
Thank you.
Is to report and refer to appropriations. Please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic voting machine. Please close the roll. Bill reports and refers 7-1. Thank you very much. Delegate Lopez. This is HB 1184.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good evening.
Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rooftops, parking lots, closed landfills, former mine lands, and other spaces have the potential to produce nearly one-third of Virginia's electric needs with clean local energy, solar power. Building distributed solar could save taxpayer dollars, create jobs, and stimulate the economy, all while lowering Virginia's carbon footprint. Additionally, distributed generation makes the Commonwealth more resilient in the face of climate change and threats to the grid. Virginia law supports a growing market for large-scale solar projects, but has not kept up with the demands for small-scale, customer-sited distributed solar. Worse, policy barriers hold communities back from investing in the clean energy source that customers most want today. Currently, most distributed generation in Virginia happens through net metering, which allows customers to consume the energy their solar panels produce. The panels produce more than the customer needs. Excess energy rolls over as credit against energy used when the sun isn't shining. Customers only pay the utility for energy if their monthly consumption exceeds the total amount of energy the solar panels produced. Customers also pay a monthly fee for transmission and distribution. The traditional utility business model relies on large power stations pumping electricity onto a one-way grid. Distributed generation disrupts this by producing electricity where it's used, reducing the need for long-distance transmission, and saving customers money. Distributed generation, particularly solar, provides numerous other benefits, such as reducing the need for the utility to build expensive new generation, helping to reduce carbon emissions, and increasing grid resilience and emergency preparedness in communities. Virginia law imposes a thicket of limitations, conditions, and penalties in the solar industry and its customers. Together, these barriers choke up the potential for distributed solar energy generation and add to millions of dollars of lost revenue growth for Virginia. Here's what the bill does. In order to promote the establishment of distributed solar in Virginia, my bill makes a number of changes to our state code. One, it increases the cap on the total amount of renewable energy that can be net metered in a utility service territory from 1% to 10%. It authorizes third-party power purchase agreements for all customer classes throughout the Commonwealth. It allows for local governments, certain other public bodies, to install solar facilities up to 5 megawatts on government-owned property and use electricity for government-owned buildings. It allows all net metering customers to attribute output from a single solar array to multiple meters. It allows the owner of a multifamily residential building or the common areas of a condominium to install a solar energy generation facility and sell the electricity to tenants or condominium unit owners. It removes the restrictions on customers installing a net metered generation facility larger than that required to meet their previous 12 months demand. It raises the cap for net metered non-residential generation facilities from 1 megawatt to 3 megawatts, and it removes the ability of utilities to assess standby charges. Don't tax the sun. The bill also amends the Commonwealth Energy Policy to include provisions supporting distributed generation of solar energy and states that the distributed generation of solar electricity is in the public interest of the Commonwealth of Virginia. By enacting these changes, the General Assembly can affirm its commitment to distributed solar generation and encourage the growth of renewable energy usage across Virginia. I hope it's the will of the committee to pass the bill.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Any questions for Delegate Lopez from the members of the panel? Seeing none, I'm going to call for anyone who wants to testify in favor of HB 1184. I want you all to look at the clock as you walk up. It is getting late, and we recognize a lot of your faces. Please let us know who you are, who you represent, and whether you support the bill.
Yes. Christiana Reeder, Virginia Poor People's Campaign, we support.
Thank you.
Shippey Sierra, support. Nathan Souls, Zero Carbon Virginia, we support.
Chelsea Barnes, Appalachian Voices, we support.
Anyone in the audience want to testify against HB 1184?
Mr. Chairman, not necessarily against, but we removed a lot of these hurdles in electric co-op territory. Andrew V. Horn with the electric co-ops. We removed a lot of these last year. I would ask the patron and the committee to consider a carve-out similar to Delegate Keem's bill.
Mr. Chairman, Ron Jefferson, Appalachian Power Company. Just as before, net metering was designed to offset some or all the load for an individual customer. This expands it beyond that, and we ask you not to support the bill.
Delegate, the last couple of words.
Please pass.
It's good. Delegate Ayala? Is there a second?
Where'd Mark Keem go?
I'll second. I was just going to try. All right.
Hold on.
There's been a
Mark's right
motion
there.
properly seconded to report. Clerk, please open the roll. Members, please vote.
Yeah.
Bill reports 6-3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee.
So the next on the docket is three bills from Delegate Sullivan, and we're going to take up House Bill 1526. This is House Bill 1526, introduced by Delegate Sullivan. And as he takes the podium, do we have any amendments on this one?
We do not.
We do
Not
not,
yet,
okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
And if I'm going to talk the talk, I need to walk the walk, so I will be as brief as I can. The hour is late. I have a somewhat unusual request and story to tell the committee. You have in front of you 1526, which has come to be known as the Virginia Clean Economy Act. This bill has been the subject of, really frankly, Herculean negotiation over the course of the first part of this session from a wide variety, frankly, I think the widest variety of stakeholders any bill like this has ever seen. There is, in production, a substitute, but it does not exist yet. What I'm going to assure the committee is, the subcommittee is, that by Thursday, should you feel that the bill should advance by Thursday in full committee, we will have a sub and an opportunity to talk even further about the changes that the sub might make. But the sub is, of course, based on the basic structure of the introduced act, which really has four pillars, which have to do with declining the emissions caps in Virginia, energy efficiency in Virginia, a mandatory renewable portfolio standard along with a mandatory energy efficiency resource standard, and issues having to do with environmental justice, equity, and labor. The bill will, I think it is safe to say, bring Virginia from back of the pack in terms of climate and energy policy in this country to near the front of the pack. This will bring to zero emission, sets very clear zero emission goals of 2050, and frankly, I think it'll be 2045 by the time we get to you Thursday. There's an absolute cap with zero emissions from power plants that essentially ensure that no new fossil plants are going to be built in Virginia. What's going to happen is that the incentives going forward will result in investments in clean and renewable energy rather than in fossil fuel energy. There will be a mandatory RPS, taking what was a voluntary RPS and put us forward with a strong mandatory one that's going to really skyrocket what we do in clean energy and, of course, the jobs that go with it. This is a jobs bill. In fact, Advanced Energy Economy did a study and found that if this bill becomes law, it will create 13,000 new jobs every year. There will be tremendous progress in rooftop solar, which of course we all know is called distributed generation. Delegate Lopez was just talking about that. It'll increase the full retail cap to 5% with a 1% carve out for low-income solar customers. It'll make some changes to standby charges. It will have a PPA cap increase to 500 megawatts in the Dominion territory and to 40 in APCO service territory. And the maximum residential system size will be increased to 25 kilowatts with full net metering in Dominion's territory. What we'll be doing with energy efficiency with this bill is very exciting. This will take us from what is really a non-existent simple goal that was based on simply spending money on energy efficiency to an actual goal of 2.5% cumulative energy savings in Dominion territory. And that will be a mandatory goal. which will really double what is sort of what you might call business as usual. Lots of progress here in offshore wind. This bill is going to steal some language from Delegate Hayes' bill, but not the language about all costs being reasonably and prudently incurred. Also, lots of storage in this bill. A key component of any clean energy economy we all know is going to be storage. This will have 3,100 megawatts by 2035, 2,700 of them in the Dominion Territory, 400 in APCO. I'm going to be quiet. One last thing, we also have a PIP in it that Delegate Bagby has a separate bill for to make sure, it's very similar to your bill, Delegate Bagby, to make sure that lower income people have access to this kind of energy. So I'm not going to tell you on Thursday that this bill is perfect, certainly not perfect yet, but it's going to be an incredibly far-reaching step, taking Virginia, as I said, to the forefront of what's being done around the country. I'm excited about the bill. I would ask that you refer it in its current form to the full committee and promise to come back to you with all of the details once they are drawn up by Thursday.
Thank you, Delegate Sullivan. So let me first turn to the subcommittee, and since I'm not sitting in the chair's seat, I don't see the RTS button. So if you could just call your, yeah. So if you want to be recognized, could you just holla like Ayala? All right. Anybody in the subcommittee? That's her thing. If not, we'll turn to the members of the public. Those in the audience wishing to speak in favor of House Bill 1526, please line up. And if you wouldn't mind being somewhat on the brief side. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank the patron, Will Cleveland, Southern Environmental, absolutely support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Godfrey, Virginia Advanced Energy Economy, just elaborating slightly further on what the patron said in regards to the legislation. A wide variety of stakeholders have been at the table in order to make certain that we were able to move forward with a consensus product that represents the interests of those at the table. We feel very good about the agreement we have come to and the progress being made in order to achieve the substitute legislation that the patron spoke of during his remarks. So thank you, and we ask for the support of the committee.
Good evening, Chelsea Harnish, Virginia Energy Efficiency Council. We support the bill and want to thank the patron for being one of the strongest energy efficiency leaders in the legislature. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bruce Burkett, I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition. We have quite a few utility-scale wind and solar developers, including a number of offshore wind developers, and our members will invest billions of dollars if this act is approved by you folks. So thank you very much. We strongly support the bill. Thank you.
Good evening, Rachel Smucker, the Virginia Solar Energy Industry Association. We strongly support this bill, and we thank the patron for this. Thanks.
Good evening, members of the subcommittee, Harrison Wallace, CCAN Action Fund. We support this bill and really want to thank the patron for, one, his patience as we work through this process, but also his leadership on taking strong action on climate.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Patrick Cushing on behalf of the American Wind Energy Association. We're a national trade association of onshore and offshore wind developers. Want to thank the chairman for bringing the bill, and we strongly support it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey with Sierra Club. We do thank the patron and the entire committee for their patience as some of the details get worked out. I think this is a comprehensive bill that will be a giant leap forward for Virginia. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm here to support the bill on behalf of our client series.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you, Delegate Sullivan, for your leadership on this issue. Christy Smith, Virginia Conservation Network, we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Rob Karate, Sun Tribe Solar. Also want to thank the patron for his support and leadership on this. On behalf of the 80 Virginians at Sun Tribe who make their living through solar every day, we urge you to support this particular piece of legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Danielle Simmons with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, and we strongly support the bill.
Kendall Crawford, Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. We support the bill.
Alexander Wyatt, Grid Alternatives, national solar nonprofit with a Mid-Atlantic regional affiliate. Nationally, we've installed more than 13,000 solar systems benefiting exclusively low-income households and people in disadvantaged communities. and provided our clients more than $700 million in lifetime energy savings from solar while providing thousands of people with solar job training. This bill would move things forward for equitable access to the many benefits of local renewable energy immediately, which we need to do not only because of the climate crisis, but also the energy burden crises that many low-income families face. We support the bill.
Catherine Bond with Dominion Energy, and we support the compromise legislation.
Nathan Souls, Zero Carbon Virginia. We support this legislation.
Matt Wells on behalf of West Trucker Paper Products Manufacturer, speaking tonight on behalf of the Virginia Forestry Association, Virginia Forest Products Association, the Virginia Agribusiness Association, all of whom had earlier bedtimes than I did. We're reserving judgment at the moment. We had some serious concerns with the bill as introduced, but we work with the patron and stakeholders and are looking forward to the continued conversation and getting into a better place with the bill. Thank you, patron.
Chair Scott McCary, Washington Gas. We appreciate the patron's initiative, the patron's patience, and support the bill.
Ron Jefferson, Appalachian Power. We support the bill.
Thank you. I think it might be worth asking if there are folks in the public who may have different views, just to be fair to our patron. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak either against or any other comments that were not in the original category? Thank you.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Jolie Moffness with Food and Water Action here. I want to express our serious concerns with HB 1526. First of all, generally it has problematic features that would underdeliver on getting Virginia to 100% renewables and preclude a better path forward. For example, HB 1526 fails to phase out natural gas production at a time when fracked gas plants and pipelines are expanding in Virginia. On top of not stopping pipelines or compressor stations, it also has a loophole for gas plants to be built that are not investor-owned utilities. For example, like the ones in Charles City County. The version we've seen on 1526 says little to nothing about transitioning workers and communities away from fossil fuels, nor does it place protection for environmental justice communities. In fact, the bill promotes a pay-to-pollute system called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is shown to hurt low-income and communities of color disproportionately in other states who have adopted RGGI. 1526 also leaves a carve-out for nuclear, so it's more accurate to call this bill 60% by 2045, because nuclear is not safe, nor clean, nor renewable, so this is a grave omission. There's also language to allow waste to energy and landfill gas to be considered a renewable, further making a mockery definition of renewables. Unfortunately, 1526 has a lot of questionable provisions like this that water down the bill, and the 2050 date itself is too late a goal by which to address the urgency of climate change. IPCC says we need to do something within the next 10 years by 2030, and this is gravely mistaken of a timeline. Finally, the bill does have good language on net metering. I'll give them that. But our hope is that the committee will look to set truly ambitious 100% renewable energy goals that gets Virginia on a path off of fossil fuels while creating a just and fair, clean economy as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, Christiana Reeder with Virginia Poor People's Campaign again, and I'd like to second everything that my colleague here just
Thank
said. Thank you.
Hello, my name is William Spencer. I'm speaking on behalf of Sunrise Movement and Sunrise Movement Richmond. I would like to third those comments, but also explain further in the IPCC report warming of 1.5 degrees. It stated that we need to reduce emissions to get to 1.5 degrees before 2030 if we want to have a habitable Earth and avoid the worst aspects of climate change. However, laid out in the report, it says that we will get to technically 100% renewables by 2050, and this is too late. Laid out in the Production Gap Emissions Report 2019, they stated that we are currently not on a pathway to reach 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, or even meet the emission standards set out by the Paris Climate Accords, which were significantly underwhelming. Specifically, it said that we are currently producing 50% more gigatons of CO2 than would be needed to meet 2 degrees Celsius and 120% more gigatons of CO2 than would be needed to meet the 1.5 threshold of having a somewhat habitable Earth and meeting the worst aspects of climate change. So I think that although there are many good provisions in this bill, sadly it is inadequate, and with the passing in the House of the HJ 136, This does not solve the climate emergency that we have declared in Virginia, and we need to take bolder action that puts a moratorium on fossil fuels moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Trish. I'm from Southwest Virginia, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of a number of residents across the state who have been fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. We refer to this Virginia Clean Economy Act as a very no-teeth, watered-down, non-solution to the problem that we face and that we've been fighting on the ground for 5 years. I would also like to point out that I took great offense at Mr. Sullivan's chief of staff, who insinuated to me today that because I was asking to receive a draft of some of the amendments so I would know how to take that information and apply it to the entire bill that I've read, and I was told that I obviously don't understand the legislative process. And I just want to speak to that, because as a constituent in this state who has stood in this room more times than I can count, watching the corruption, I do understand the legislative process, and I do understand what the young people say when they say we don't have enough time. So I'm here to tell you that this is bullshit. The Green New Deal is the only bill that has been put forth that really represents how the young people in this state feel, how those of us who are opposed to any continued fossil fuel infrastructure feel.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. And I just want to, first, respectfully, I understand people have different views on this. Many of us have different views on these as well. But if we can keep it to the substance of the bill, I think it would be better for all of us. And we have the commitment from the patron that the language will be made available as soon as he can. And we also know that the legislative process is not done overnight. There are many, many steps to this. So I'd ask the patience and understanding of everybody in this room as we work through this together. Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Joshua Vann. I come from the Shenandoah Valley, representing Raptors of the Valley and Artivism, Virginia. And to the members of the subcommittee, I would just like to stress that if this legislation is put through on the trust that it's going to be perfect later, that maybe a little bit of that trust also be extended to other ambitious legislation tackling some similar topics. And I would also just caution all of us to in a very careful way, read through whatever language ends up on this concerning environmental justice, seeing that one of the stakeholders in this does not have such a good record.
Thank you.
Jay Tubb, I'm the host of Citizen Voices Radio, which focuses on environmental concerns in Virginia. I oppose this Virginia Clean Economy Act because I think it has too many loopholes and escape clauses that will allow the fossil fuel industry and those it supports to undermine progress in renewable resources in Virginia. And it doesn't go far enough. We're really in a climate emergency. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate everybody who showed up, all of your testimony on either side. As brief or as lengthy, it's all helpful to what we're trying to do here. Delegate Sullivan, I don't know if there's anybody else in the subcommittee who has any questions. If not, we will turn back to the patron. Any other questions? Delegate Sullivan.
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Sullivan, and we certainly look forward to continuing to work with you throughout the next couple of days and the next few weeks as different legislative vehicles move through this body. The committee operates on the motion. The motion has been properly made to report House Bill 1526. All in favor shall vote on the electronic voting machine. The clerk will close the roll. The motion reports on a vote of 5-4 to the full committee. Delegate Sullivan, you have two other bills.
Yes, and I think I can do these very quick, Mr. Chairman, because of course the hour is late, and there's more to do. 1451 is a renewable energy, mandatory renewable energy portfolio standard. I'll explain to the committee that what it is a freestanding version of the RPS that's included in the Clean Economy Act. I've put it in separately, essentially as a placeholder. If for some reason the Clean Economy Act needs to be broken up, we will already have that part of it freestanding as a bill. So it's this is not anything that you haven't seen before. It's the mandatory RPS portion of the Clean Economy Act.
Thank you, Delegate Sullivan. Any questions from the subcommittee to the patron? If not, do we have anybody in the audience wishing to speak in favor? You don't have to, but if you want to, this is your chance. And there are a couple of members who are sending me some signs. Those who are opposed to this measure, please express your views. If not, we're back to the subcommittee. The motion has been properly made and seconded to move report House Bill 1451. Clerk will open the electronic voting machine. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's been done. House Bill 1451 moves on a 7-3 vote. Thank you. And Delegate Sullivan, House Bill 1450.
Yes, same situation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Same situation. 1450 simply represents the mandatory EERS portion of the Clean Economy Act. Again, put in as a freestanding bill as a placeholder on the, in the event that the Clean Economy Act has to be broken up for some reason. We'll have a bill in place to do that.
Thank you, Delegate Sullivan. Likewise, anybody in the audience wishing to speak in favor or opposed or any other concerns or comments, please come on up. You do have a couple of members, Delegate Sullivan, behind you.
Sorry. Chairman, members of the committee, very briefly, as you're aware, there is one resource, energy resource that you'll consider that by its very purpose and design and under our SCC's own rules and approval process, by definition, lowers ratepayer costs, and that is Dominion and APCO delivered energy efficiency programs that are approved by the SCC. For that reason and for those cost lowering and carbon lowering benefits, I would urge you to vote yes on this.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Dana Wiggins with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. We appreciate the efforts under this bill, and one of the reasons that VPLC became involved in energy at all, in part, was to help ratepayers take into their own hands their ability to reduce their bills, and energy efficiency is a big part of that. For every $2 invested in energy efficiency, there's $3.51 in benefits that results from that, and we think it's an important step forward. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chase Counts. I'm with Community Housing Partners. We are a nonprofit and the largest provider of weatherization and energy efficiency services to low-income, elderly, and other vulnerable populations in Virginia. We've served over 50,000 Virginia households since we got started back in 1976, and we support these programs with their focus on expanding energy equity issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Lena Lewis with the Nature Conservancy. We support this bill. 27 other states have an energy efficiency resource standard like this. Their utility companies have been able to meet or exceed the benchmarks set by those bills, and if those utilities can do that, I have full faith that the utilities in Virginia can do so as well.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience in the public wishing to speak on either side? If not, we're back to the subcommittee. Delegate Sullivan, any other comments?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. House Bill 1450 is properly reported and seconded. All in favor shall vote on the electronic voting machine. Yeah. House Bill 1450 reports on a 10-0 vote.
Thank you, Delegate Keem. Delegate Rasool, HB 77.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, first, thank you for allowing me to go last and to skip the State of the Union address tonight. I appreciate that. House Bill 77 is before you today as the Green New Deal Act. What we know about the Green New Deal Act and the Green New Deal, Mr. Chairman, is that it is, in fact, is not an environmental plan. We've heard a lot of good bills that have passed out of here tonight, bills that will help the Commonwealth in a lot of different ways. But what I'm scared of, Mr. Chairman, is that we develop these plans and policies and not keep in mind the intersectional struggles that we have. So we need to make sure that there are lots of folks from different backgrounds who are included and who are lifted up as we move forward. We mentioned briefly environmental justice, but also we'll talk more about PLAs, project labor agreements. How are we investing in specific environmental justice communities? These are issues that need to be addressed. So for me, Mr. Chairman, what I'll do is I'll quickly walk through the legislation and then answer some questions that you have, and then we'll talk about kind of the broader vision very quickly. So first, in House Bill 77, we define what an environmental justice community is. So a low-income community or a community of color that has really been left out of the conversation. And a lot of resources and energy goes towards those individuals as we move forward. Second, Mr. Chairman, we talk about at the retail level what goals we have as we move forward that we believe meet the climate crisis that is before us. And we know that this is doable because in the Advanced Energy Economies report that came out, they said it is feasible for us to be bold, for us to demand more, and was the basis of the Clean Economy Act, which just passed here. So we say that by 2036 at the retail level, what we're going to buy and sell, 100% of that should be renewable. But second, Mr. Chairman, what I think is most important is that if we are serious about this climate crisis, if we are serious about developing a comprehensive plan and moving forward, we must begin with a moratorium on all fossil fuel infrastructure moving forward regardless. What this bill does is it outlines what this moratorium might look like. So beginning in January 1, 2021, all new electric generating facilities that generate fossil fuel energy through combustion of any fossil fuel resources would no longer be able to be built. Any new or expanding import terminal for fossil fuel resources, any maintenance that expands the capacity, any new gathering line or pipeline for the transport of any fossil fuel resource that requires the use of eminent domain on private property, Mr. Chairman, we are saying that these and a few others, there is a moratorium because we believe that if we're going to address the climate crisis, that we must begin with this moratorium, or else all of the baseline information that's in this AAE report, all of the baseline information that's being used to develop a whole host of legislation that has come out already, we are unfortunately undermining that. Next, Mr. Chairman, what this bill does is directs DMME and the director, giving him authority to be able to create a comprehensive climate action plan. A comprehensive climate action plan that takes into account land use and agriculture, carbon sequestration that can happen through a lot of these measures. We take into account mitigation and adaptation. We take into account resiliency and so many other pieces that are part of a true comprehensive climate action plan. In that climate action plan is where we begin to then prescribe what this looks like from a generation perspective. We already mentioned the retail on one end, but how will we generate and how will we do that mindfully as we move forward? And this is important. But at the heart of that climate action plan is, of course, Mr. Chairman, the Green New Deal is not an environmental plan, it is an intersectional plan where we address the dueling crises that are before us of economic inequality and the climate crisis. And so what we aim to do here is to make sure that these investments go into these communities, low-income communities in poor rural Virginia and poor inner-city Virginia alike, to make sure that we are lifting up these communities as much as possible. We set aggressive energy efficiency goals where we believe that we, by 2035, can have a reduction of 36% over where we would have been in 2035. And we do that through many of the same measures, Mr. Chairman, that you have championed in the past through weatherization, et cetera. We also talk about how we're going to transition workers into a clean energy, but also transitioning workers who are moving out of the fossil fuel industry. And Mr. Chairman, it finalizes with a number of provisions that talk about extensively how, from an environmental justice perspective, we can make sure that these investments that should be made. You heard from a whole host of business interests that are very anxious to be able to invest in Virginia, and we're thankful for that. But those investments need to make sure that we're thinking about the equity issues across the board. And here we talk about the very specific investments that should be made. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on House Bill 77.
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Any questions for Delegate Rasool from members of the committee? Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Rasool, looking under the moratorium on new major fossil fuel projects, A2, any new or expanding import or export terminal for fossil fuel resources. I guess I have a two-part question. One, does that include, because I realize we're talking about something bigger than just electric utilities or that type of energy. Are we talking in this particular portion A2, does that include like a fuel terminal for like motor vehicle fuels?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate O'Quinn, I believe the answer would be no in that instance.
Okay.
Because here what we're trying to do is talk about at the larger transmission level where we're increasing overall capacity, and at one point we talk about like 5% as this threshold. So we do understand that, for example, that there may be the need for a distribution down a road somewhere. This is meant to cap large new fossil fuel investments.
Mr. Chairman, the second part of the
Delegate
question. So talking about import, export terminals, does that rope in like LNG exports? Because I know we do have some of that goes to the port.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate O'Quinn, I believe the answer to that is yes. So if we're talking about new investments at that juncture, those investments would be banned here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I really applaud the intent of where you're going with this, Delegate Rasool. Very quick question, though, regarding sort of going line by line here. There are instances where you're talking about federal funds, state funds, making contracts, making scholarships and low-interest loans. Are you anticipating that this goes to appropriations?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Lopez, we'd never like these things to go to appropriations, but there certainly are a lot of moving parts financially in the long term. Of course, much of that language is comprehensive inside of the Climate Action Plan, which is to be developed as we evolve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Delegate Rasool from the members of the committee? Are there any members of the audience who would like to testify in favor of HB 77? All right, now you all know the hour is late. The hour is late. We want to hear from you, but I would ask that you try to be as brief as you possibly can.
Good evening. I'm very tired, but I am not tired of fighting for House Bill 77,
which is the only renewable standards plan that protects and justly transitions workers. We need to facilitate the transfer to clean energy now, or else Virginia's workers, especially those in low-income, color, labor, and rural communities, will be left behind. In my hurry, I'm Daisy Griffin. I'm a 19-year-old college student in Williamsburg and member of the Sunrise Movement. I would ask of you to take note of how many people showed up for this bill today. This late. I've been here for about 14 hours, and keep in mind that your constituents will not forget your decision tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, Emily Little. On July 19th, 2014, I gave birth to my daughter, Sarita, and right after, I almost died from a postpartum hemorrhage. Because I'm an ER nurse, I knew that the number of people in my room was not good, and I had a moment that seemed to last a lifetime when I thought that my daughters would grow up not being protected by their mother and not being kept safe. The feeling that I wake up with every morning because of climate change is that same feeling that I am not doing enough to protect my children. And they know that I'm not doing enough to protect them and that you are not doing enough to protect them. We have to expect more from the adults in this room, or our children are not going to make the choice to have children. The scientists are telling us to put our bodies on the line because the science is so serious at this point that they are saying we will not survive as a species. How can I ignore that as a mother? And how can you ignore that as parents and grandparents? Please do more and do your elected job.
Hi, Joshua Vanna with Raptors and Artivism, Virginia. I'd like to speak to the bill, and I'd also like to make one quick note about a friend who is expressing some frustration. Should be acknowledged. I hope you can make consideration for it that a lot of us in this line and hundreds more in Southwest Virginia have experienced some very difficult times in this particular room with the State Water Control Board in their abandonment of their duties and of Southwest Virginia, and particularly the waters of Virginia. So if there's frustration, a lot of us understand that it is understandable. The Green New Deal Act for Virginia has support from the broad and deep coalition across the state, including the grassroots. The grassroots matter. We need a moratorium on fossil fuel projects in this state, including the C4GT and Chickahominy Power Station, slated for Charles City County Environmental Justice Community. 2 frac gas power plants. One's going to be the biggest in the state, and also the 5th largest in the country. That's not moving toward Executive 43. Environmental justice, not merely a box to be checked or language to be stricken from other proposed legislation. And we need a just transition to a clean energy economy, democratized, equitable access to renewable energy, and away from the monopoly system that leaves us all overcharged and begging for those hundreds of millions of dollars back from Dominion. Bravery is going to be required from this subcommittee, and I hope everyone's up to it. And bravery is going to be required by the legislature and through millions of Virginians. So I hope you can consider all these things. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Monticello. I'm 17 years old, and I'm the leader of Sunrise Movement, Fairfax County. Our organization strongly supports the Green New Deal Act because it's the only bill that aligns with the science and has the urgency that we need for a livable future. It's also the only bill that addresses environmental justice, which is essential for a successful and just transition to renewable energy to take place. My organization is primarily made up of high schoolers. We can't vote yet, but by the time we're able to, it may be too late. If we don't take substantial action on climate change now, my generation will see more frequent natural disasters, worse air quality, and in short, an unlivable future. We're scared that if our elected officials don't act right now, the future of our entire species will be threatened. This is a crisis that needs to be taken seriously, and right now, those in power don't seem to see that. My generation did not create this problem, and we shouldn't have to solve it. Our future is in your hands, and we ask you to make the right decision and choose to ensure a livable future for our generation and generations to come. Thank you.
I'm Kay Ferguson with Waters Life Protected in Artemisville, Virginia. And I just wanted to speak in support of HB 77, the Green New Deal Act, on the basis of it being practical and pragmatic in two basic ways. I've heard HB 77, the Green New Deal Act, called slight, impractical, impossible, and in this instance, that's just a code for visionary. Because this flagship bill for a constellation of legislation that should be done is the only legislation before you that meets the facts of climate change. They're urgent, they're imperative, and they don't care what you do. The physics of climate change are coming. They don't care what Dominion and APCO's bottom line is or what it becomes. They don't care what party rules this General Assembly. They don't care if our children live or die. They're coming. It seems impractical to me to introduce legislation at this moment that would force you in the future to balance the budget of the Commonwealth of Virginia when Norfolk is underwater. That seems impractical to me, possibly impossible. It seems impractical to continue to poison our water supply as a Commonwealth with increased fossil fuel infrastructure, especially fracking, when we are facing a future that will be warmer and will have more people and less water. That's not practical. It seems impractical to me to continue to sell out the rural counties and geographies of this state. They've been sold to the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and they're getting ready to be sold to the people that are trying to build something down in Charles City, and they've been sold cheap. But it's not practical to cut off and poison the places that your water, your air, and your food is coming from. That's not practical. The other impracticality of not passing the Green New Deal Act at this point is political. To repeat that awkward moment when your largest donor wants one thing and the people rightly want another. To pass what's left of the Virginia Clean Economy Act once the Dominion lawyers finish putting it through their meat grinder and writing it up. But we don't even know what it is, because that's another thing. This last minute it comes in. It's really complicated. It's really long. We don't even know what it is. We don't get to respond. To think, what's also politically impractical is to think that if you do not act boldly with a Green New Deal Act right now, that any greenwashing you do, any boasting and braying you walk out of here with your climate change legislation and your new clean economy and all that is going to go over, because even the kids in this room know the facts and know what you're doing and what you're not doing. Meet the facts. Pass the Green New Deal.
Good evening. My name is Kelsey Wright, and I am 19 years old, and I'm the hub coordinator of the William Mary Williamsburg Hub of the Sunrise Movement, which is a movement of young people to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process through a Green New Deal. We are strongly in support of this bill, and I urge you to join us in supporting it. I remember being 3 years old and watching Hurricane Isabel with my mom. I had to text her earlier and ask her what hurricane it was because I just remember seeing the hurricane and being with my 1-year-old brother. I remember annual flooding in my hometown of Alexandria. I remember learning about climate change for the first time in 3rd grade. I remember my first week of college being evacuated for Hurricane Florence. I remember this summer when Alexandria received 4 inches of flooding in 1 hour, 4 inches of rain. And in all of those, I remember the fear that I felt, and I don't want to have to feel that way anymore. And I don't want other people to have to feel that way because of climate change. You have a choice tonight on whether you will stand for bold climate action with the Green New Deal Act, or you will stand with your donors and the fossil fuel lobby. And you'll continue to let children live in fear. The only thing holding you back is your ambition. And I'm demanding that you choose action and support House Bill 77. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amy Schertz, and I'm with Sunrise Williamsburg. I'm a physicist. I was supposed to be at Jefferson Lab today working on my PhD, but instead I'm here. I'm here because I have lived in fear since I was a young teenager and I learned the true scope of the climate crisis and how doomed we are as a species if we continue to maintain the status quo. I support HB 77 because the time for half measures is long over. It's time for bold action. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Simon. I'm with the Richmond Sunrise Hub. I will keep this brief because you guys look tired. But you guys have a choice tonight. I want to emphasize that you can choose to stand with young people and make a choice for the future tonight. We have the opportunity to act before Hampton Roads is flooded and before we have to decide where all the people who lived in Norfolk need to go. We have the opportunity to set an example for other first world countries and other states who have yet to pass this sort of legislature. We need to pass this for the future of life on Earth and for future generations. I've chosen to not have kids because I know that that's something that's going to make the planet worse, and I want to be able to contribute. But I can't foster, well, that's another issue. But we need to expand our conception of what is possible and act boldly in the name of the future. I know that this is an unprecedented and potentially uncomfortable bill, but it's the climate plan that was influenced directly by a coalition of Virginians. It is a plan that's going to put a moratorium on fossil fuels, the polluters, and hold accountable the companies that have been pushing us worse into climate change. We feel the effects of the climate crisis already in Australia, in America, in the polar ice caps. But I'm asking you to act seriously and treat this issue with the gravity that it deserves, because this is the future of America we're talking about. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kendall Crawford, Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, we support the bill.
Hi, my name is Elena, and I'm from Richmond. I'm also with the Sunrise Group. I support the Green New Deal because it provides the timeline we actually need for this climate emergency and will improve Virginia's economy along the way. Virginia is not immune to climate change. Norfolk is the second most vulnerable city to climate change. We don't have a choice but to implement this bill if we want to protect Virginia's future. And I also ask that you consider the world as well. Already island nations are sinking into the oceans and millions are dying from extreme weather, illnesses intensified by climate change, and food scarcity. These issues will occur in Virginia, are already happening, and will intensify. climate change is not a linear, gradual change as many people believe it is. There is a tipping point which we cannot fix things anymore. The timeline has been laid out by scientists, and this Green New Deal is the best legislation to follow that. I, like many others, have had climate anxiety since a young age. I have coped with that by accepting the fact that my future is unlikely. And while this does provide the chance to really appreciate life for what it is, I would rather not have to think like that. So I believe we have a moral imperative to act on climate change in a very serious manner, not only as citizens of Virginia, but as global citizens.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'd like to remind everybody that last Wednesday, the House passed House Joint Resolution 136 that acknowledged the global scientific consensus that we are facing a climate emergency. And unfortunately, the only people who chose to vote for that bill were the 6 Democrats in the room. So I'd like to speak to the 6 of you tonight and encourage you to dignify your vote last Wednesday, to dignify your integrity and support this bill, the piece of legislation that most treats climate change like the emergency that you've proclaimed it to be. Thank you.
Hello, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Meredith Haynes. I'm a member of Herndon, Reston, Indivisible, very active group who also, along with Virginia Grassroots, support this bill. And personally, as a chemical oceanographer, I'd like you to listen to the scientists and act with the urgency that this requires for.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Wallace, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Action Fund. Really, I just wanted to thank the patron who, we crowned as our Climate Champion of the Year a couple of years ago for a reason. He wanted to take action on this, and I think it's put forward a package that can really do a lot on climate change and other issues in the intersectional manner in our Commonwealth. I think this bill, along with the bill that CCAN supports and the Clean Economy Act as well, in their original forms, needed some work to deal with low-income communities and communities of color. I think we are doing that. I know the patron has every intention to make that happen, and we'd love to work with him if this bill continues to move forward. But the spirit of it is something that CCAN will always support. So thank you for your work, and also thanks to Karen Camplin and Lee Williams who helped put all this together.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey with Sierra Club. I've been up here a lot tonight. Haven't actually said a whole lot, but as a father of 5, I really feel the climate emergency for their sakes, and I think we need every tool at our disposal to deal with it. And that's why Sierra Club can support multiple different ways to handle this. So we may need a new all-of-the-above strategy here to deal with the climate emergency. I think this bill has a lot that's worthy of support, so we do stand with the patron. Appreciate his work on this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jolene Moffness with Food and Water Action here. I just want to express a really strong support for the Green New Deal Act because, 1, it's the only one that really adheres to what scientists say with the timeline. 2, it has the fossil fuel moratorium that's very definite and includes fossil fuel infrastructure in areas with which Delegate Ayala's district is actually going to face with the Transco Southeastern Trail Expansion Project and the Virginia Natural Gas Header Project, along with a 25-acre compressor station that also Fauquier County has opposed for the Transco pipeline, so these communities don't want this. On top of that, this is the only bill that does a holistic approach to the clean sector economy by putting workers forward and environmental justice communities forward, like training programs for environmental justice communities, along with low-interest loans, scholarships for them to get into this sector, transition assistance for these workers, something we haven't seen in any other climate bills. And finally, it's the most ambitious solution we have on the table, and the climate urgency needs to be acted on now. Thank you.
My name's Sarah Jobin. I'm just a citizen. We have so little time. The tipping point is so close. And on behalf of not only our species, but every other species on the planet, Please consider the next 7 generations.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, my name is Barbara Adams, and I'm with Richmond Interfaith Climate Justice League. We commend the patron and all of those who crafted and supported it to bring it to you tonight. We see the HB 77 as the most comprehensive, courageous and compassionate legislation to address climate change in a way that really needs to respond to the urgency. And regardless of the outcome tonight, I want you to know that I and the people that I work with, and probably most of the people commenting, will continue to fight for legislation that looks just like this bill. I hope you pass it. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Jessica Sims. I'm representing Virginia Pipeline Resistors. We are in support of this bill as it addresses the urgency of the climate crisis and the necessity of a moratorium on any new fossil fuel infrastructure.
Hello again, Chairman and members of the board. Christiana Reeder again with the Virginia Poor People's Campaign, and we are 100% behind this bill. And I'm too tired to speak anymore, and you are too tired to listen, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and board members. My name is Aileen Rivera. I'm with the Liberal Women of Chesterfield County and beyond, and we endorse this bill, HB 77. The Green New Deal Act is the most comprehensive plan transitioning into clean energy economy. And I would really want you to think hard. You've been gifted the opportunity to make an impact. This is the only chance you get. And this plan has the ability for you to actually make a real impact, which Virginia has been making all along now. So please vote for HB 77. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Dave Kieberich, and I'm speaking in behalf of the NOVA Climate Coalition. That's an informal alliance of 15 environmental and political organizations with a collective membership of several thousand. We strongly support this bill, and we much prefer it over the Virginia Clean Economy Act. So we hope that you will support this bill. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Karp. I'm one of those dreaded constituents. I live in Haymarket, Virginia. This is not the first time I have come to the Capitol to fight for the environment or the first time I have come to fight for the lives of the people of this Commonwealth. Yes, you all hold people's lives in your hands. When I came to plead for Medicaid expansion, it was for 4,000 lives, but now I come to plead for all Virginian lives, mine included. If we don't act immediately by doing everything possible, people will die because they couldn't breathe, people will die because they couldn't drink the water, people will die from the heat, people will die in the fires. This is not hysterical rhetoric. This is happening right now all over the world. We have the answer. It's HB 77, the Green New Deal Act. No new fossil fuel projects, labor protection, a timeline that addresses the urgency. I am 77 years old, and I made this 4-hour trip alone because my story is I live off the grid in the rural Crescent in Haymarket. My water comes from a well fed by streams. They want to build 2 pipelines in Prince William County, and the moratorium contained in HB 77 will protect my water source. I'm here speaking to your moral compass, to your conscience, to you as parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends. Don't be responsible for risking the lives of people that you care about and love. You were elected by the people of this Commonwealth to do what is best for the people who pay your salary. We need the Green New Deal Act because it means no new fossil fuel projects. It contains labor protections And most importantly, it's a timeline that addresses the urgency of the climate crisis. It's a bill that can be tweaked. Please do your job. Pass the Green New Deal. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Stephen Spitz. I'm speaking on behalf of Progressive Democrats of America, Virginia, and Our Revolution Falls Church. I live in Fairfax County myself. And I wanted to reiterate the comments made by a young man a little bit earlier. This House passed Delegate Guzman's bill saying that we are in a climate emergency. Now, any definition of the word emergency means that action needs to be taken now as fast as possible to address the climate emergency. It would not make sense to say we have a climate emergency and then take half measures delayed over many years when there's an emergency. The word emergency obviously has a very clear meaning. That means you need to address it as if it is an emergency. And the Green New Deal treats the emergency as an emergency. Please vote for the Virginia Green New Deal.
I'm Blythe Merritt. I'm with 350 Fairfax. And for all these reasons that have been stated, we support HB 77.
Bobby Monticello for Mothers Out Front Fairfax. And we support HB 77 for all the reasons that have been stated, especially I stand with Emily, my fellow mothers out front, and also my daughter, Katie. You know, our kids deserve a livable future, and so does everyone's kid in this room, their grandkids. So please support this bill. Thank you.
Alexandra Wyatt, Great Alternatives, and I want to thank the proponents of this bill for showing that it's not just possible, but a good idea to address environmental and equity issues at the same time. There are certainly challenges with going about things that way, but that's also the only way that you can really capture the sorts of synergies and win-win benefits that can make these solutions more durable and effective.
Hi, my name is Sam Cooksey. I'm 19 years old, and I am a student at William & Mary, and I'm here with the Williamsburg Sunrise Movement Hub. So on this committee, I see Democrats and Republicans, and I see people from every corner of this Commonwealth. And I want us to think for a moment about this bill as a universal program that benefits all of your constituents, because the climate crisis affects all of us, whether we care to admit it or not, whether we will be around for the worst of it or not. You know, this bill addresses one of the main concerns that people have had about environmental legislation for years. You know, they say, you know, oh, we are only talking about it in the context of what urban elites think about the issue, that we're not considering, you know, jobs in fossil fuel industry, which are often in rural areas. I know that there's at least one person on this committee who represents Western Virginia, a district that is probably very dependent on the coal industry. And I want you to think about whether you stand with the companies that run those mines or the workers who are concerned about not only losses job losses in the industry, but also about their future, whether the planet is going to be livable and whether they're going to have jobs to live off of. So what we're talking about with this bill is a program that benefits all Virginians. So when you vote on this bill, you can stand with the people of Virginia and this planet, or you can stand with your donors. Thank you very much. Please vote for this bill.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lee Williams. I'm co-director of Green New Deal Virginia, representing Sierra Club Virginia chapter.
And my name is Karen Camblin, representing the Virginia State Conference NAACP. I currently serve as the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee Chair. and the House Bill 77, the Green New Deal Act, closely aligns our policy here in Virginia as well as national, which is to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions as well as to encourage energy efficiency and, most importantly, to promote resiliency and vitality of our communities. And HB 77 does all three. And I implore you, I ask you to please vote yes for House Bill 77, the Green New Deal Act.
The Green New Deal Act was crafted by citizens who stepped up to the plate over the last year. We formed working groups, folks from Southwest Virginia, coal miners, folks who we've met with, people who've worked in the fossil fuel industry, trying to craft a bill that addresses all of our needs as we move forward, trying to transition Virginia quickly to a clean energy economy. And we have so many folks at the table, heartfelt folks who did it on their own time. We're volunteers. We have thrown 9 bills at you all this session on the House side. Appreciate all of our co-patrons who have stepped up to the plate to help champion our bills this session. We know it was a big undertaking, and we really appreciate all of your efforts. But you have to understand, we are here as humans, and we recognize you as humans, and we are scared. We are truly scared. I have 3 children. They don't want to have children. I'm serious. They are so freaked out by the climate crisis. They're making the choice not to have children. And our society can't continue like this. We need to band together and support each other. Our workers, our legislators, and our common folk need to band together. And this bill, Green New Deal, does that.
Our coalition that's comprised of over 60 organizations come from all different walks of life, from the environmental community, the social justice community, our economists, and our labor community. And what we did was we worked together to make sure we eliminate the barriers that prevent productive and transformative conversation. And we made sure that we tried to understand what each and every one of us are enduring, to find the solutions, to make sure that we transition to a clean energy economy in a just and equitable manner. And House Bill 77 captured that. And thank you for
for giving us the graciousness of your time and letting us all speak to this tonight. It's much appreciated. And please vote for us.
Oh, yes,
Vote
HB
for us.
77.
Thank you.
Ma'am, you are our last witness this evening.
My name's Janet Eden, and it's 11:33, way past my bedtime. If I, at my age of 66, should have been home tonight with a bottle of wine and Netflix, I don't have grandchildren to worry about and climate change. During the rest of my life, I probably will not see huge amounts that will impact my daily life. But I worry for all of my friends who have children, grandchildren, all of these young people here, and that's the reason why I stayed here so long. And there's no way you cannot vote for this and keep your jobs.
Thank you, everyone. Well, I suppose I should ask, is there anyone here to testify against HB 77?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, David Clark, representing the Virginia Oil and Gas Association. We are opposed to this legislation. Not everything in the bill, but we do need to point out to you that we recognize there is a significant debate about how quickly the Commonwealth can move toward renewable energy as the sole source of electric generation. We believe that question is left to you and to the electric utilities. We're not here to testify on that. We do think it's important for the committee and all the legislators to recognize that it's not all about electric generation. There are many manufacturing jobs in the Commonwealth that are dependent upon natural gas as a fuel for the manufacturing process. Frankly, there are many products that are dependent upon natural gas and other petrochemicals that would be prohibited under this bill. The phones that we all carry in our pockets, and many of which are being held in hands in this room, the monitors that we have up here, the chairs that we're sitting in, many of those, all of those products are dependent upon petrochemicals and natural gas to produce them. There are just two specific points I'd like to make about the bill. If you look at line 63, it says it would prohibit maintenance activity on existing pipelines, which we respectfully suggest would not only expose the public to safety concerns, but also potentially increase the opportunity for leaks that would further contaminate the environment. And secondly, if you look at line 67, this bill would effectively shut down an existing Virginia industry that's crucial to the southwest part of the Commonwealth, resulting in the loss of thousands of jobs, millions in royalty payments to Virginia citizens, and not to mention significant portions of the locality's budgets in several of the counties in southwestern Virginia. Thank you.
It's 11:37.
Mr. Chair, Petrina Jones-Robleski with Columbia Gas, and we oppose the bill.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Morgan Whalen with Virginia Natural Gas, and we oppose the bill.
Chairman Scott McGarry, Washington Gas. With great respect to the patron, I ask that it be your pleasure not to recommend the bill go forward. The Virginia Energy Plan commissioned by the General Assembly recognizes the attributes of natural gas. We're especially concerned about the provision in the bill directing the Virginia Housing and Community Development Board to develop a ban on residential use of natural gas in new residential buildings. We believe it is far better to pursue the path that you're embarked on with the other bills you've recommended tonight, and hope that will be your pleasure. Thank you.
Tyler Minnick from the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. We're opposed to the legislation.
Mr. Chairman, Tom Dick with the Municipal Electric Power Association of Virginia, and there are 14 cities and towns that have their own electric utility. 10 of them have long-term all requirements contracts, and they buy 100% of their power. And it's difficult to get, it's just going to be very difficult to meet that the standard that's set forth in the bill. I think it's 80% by 2028. We've got 5 municipalities that have a different situation. They have 12 to 22% renewable energy now, but meeting the threshold that's laid out in the bill is going to be tremendously difficult, if not impossible.
Mr. Chairman, Andrew V. Horn on behalf of the electric co-ops. There's a lot of talk about low income in this bill. There's also provisions that say some costs cannot be recovered from the ratepayer. They have to be recovered from the shareholder. In a co-op service territory, they're one and the same. We're owned by our ratepayer, so there's nowhere else to recover those costs from. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Bassey, VMA. So I have the enviable last slot. I'll be quick. Since we started with a reference to manufacturing, I figured I needed to reference something. You do have a policy conflict here in the fact that if you end fossil fuel from the point of natural gas, you end large portions of manufacturing, probably half of our manufacturing sector. That's 250,000 jobs, because the reality is if we want lighter cars, we have to have plastics in them. That's made from natural gas. If you want to have buildings that are more insulated, oftentimes that's made from natural gas. It's a raw material and a feedstock and a fuel. The other thing is never forget, we generate our own electricity, we generate our own thermal through steam to operate many of our plants. And again, natural gas is the cleanest form that we have to use. So this policy sends a statement that not only do you want a future that's a clean Virginia economy, but it also sends a signal you don't want manufacturing, or at least portions of it. So we'd ask you to be thoughtful about that in a transitional language that's in some of the other bills certainly more important for us. Thank you.
Delegate Rasool, you'll have the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Just some correct some points here. Of course, maintenance activity is directly related to expanding capacity by more than 5%, not general maintenance. Doesn't talk about ending the coal mines right away. Doesn't say anything about that at all. It says new permitting. The reality here is a lot of, I think, scare tactics around wanting to stop selling TVs and all kinds of things that this bill does not talk about. So I would hope that we take a good look at the legislation before us, Mr. Chairman, and I hope that we would pass House Bill 77.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Delegate Keane.
There was some reference earlier to the legislation that has a fiscal impact because of some of the programs that this may create. So if there were to be a motion to report, I think the proper motion would be to report and to refer to appropriations. Would the patron agree?
Mr. Chair, I did double check after Delegate Lopez's question where there wasn't a fiscal impact as delivered online. And I think there in the future probably will be. I don't know if it's in this biennium. Maybe that's why there's not a fiscal impact right now.
Just for the record, we have been told that this is part of. We have a speaker's letter. If the committee reports the bill, it has to go to appropriations.
Then
Delegate
I guess
Bagby.
it has to go to appropriations.
Delegate Bagby.
To appropriations. Second.
There's a motion to report and refer to appropriations. Clerk will open the roll. Please close. Bill is headed to appropriations. 6 to 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes this subcommittee's business. Thank you very much, members of the committee.